OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
7:30 on this Thursday morning. You're very welcome along to OTB AM. Eoin and Will with you right the way through until 10 o'clock this morning. And in two shocking plot twists last night, Arsenal shockingly fell to a 3-0 limp defeat at Manchester City. And once again, we are talking about refereeing technology. Can you believe it? Will O'Callaghan, will we start with the ghost goal?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, VAR has taken a lot of flack over the last 18 months, and VAR wasn't at fault when it came to the conversation around technology messing up last night.
The bald kid in class who has suddenly put in an exemplary record is VAR this morning.
Yeah, this is probably the most focus we've had on Hawkeye and the technology probably since the 2014 All-Ireland hurling final, because in this case, obviously, it's got it remarkably wrong. And what's probably the most frustrating about this is that they put the statement out very quickly afterwards, and it was great to see that Hawkeye were actually proactive in putting a statement out. But they say that the goalkeeper blocked the 7 camera angles which they had when it was very clear it had been carried over.
Sorry, Will, just to correct you there, he occluded the cameras. He didn't block the cameras, he occluded the cameras. That is the correct term. Occlusion is what happened.
Nice phraseology, but the one camera angle where you could see the ball carried over the line was on the TV coverage, because everyone saw that it had been carried over. I can't understand how the assistant on the far side wasn't able to see that that ball was carried over, because you'd imagine it's very easy to make a call from the position they were in. I'm sure the goalkeeper wasn't occluding the angle from the right-hand side where the assistant referee would have been able to see the ball. So that call really should have been made by the officials on the pitch anyway. And it's interesting to see that maybe our old friend VAR couldn't have stepped in when I presume the person who's in the VAR booth would have had access to all those camera angles, including the one that was used on the Sky Sports footage, which very clearly showed that the ball had gone over the line, that Sheffield United should have won that game 1-0. They would have went up to 5th place in the Premier League, and Aston Villa will be 1 point further behind in their bid to stay in the Premier League. I really hope this isn't like the Carlos Tevez incident and we're talking about Sheffield United potentially going to court, or Owen, potentially one of those teams around the bottom going to court if Aston Villa stay up by 1 point.
Yeah, and the thing I love about this is that Aston Villa are suitably terrible in the goal difference column, that they will need a point. They will need to finish a point above everybody else to stay in the division. And if this is the 1 point that has them stay up, the drama, the intrigue, the courtroom soap opera that is going to develop this summer is just going to be another layer on everything we already have. Like the whole thing, you knew straight away that it had been a complete mess up. There is such thing, in my belief, as a guilty-looking referee. And Michael Oliver was a guilty-looking referee. He knew the ball had crossed the line, and he had kind of the look of a kid staring into his school bag for his non-existent homework when he was staring down at his watch, saying, what the hell is going on with this thing? Pointing to the players, no, the watch didn't buzz. This can't possibly be a goal. And you could tell yourself, like, it was there. You were almost starting to doubt Hawkeye around different facets of the technology, as in, if something touches the net, does Hawkeye actually buzz? Because perhaps that would usually be a ball touching the net. But no, the official statement was that this level of occlusion has never been seen before in over 9,000 matches that the Hawkeye goal line technology system has been in operation. A tremendous coincidence, I think, is the paraphrasing there. So 7 cameras, as you said, will blocked by the goalkeeper, defender, and goalpost. And there was a moment when you watched it back where you weren't sure if it was the ball or the sleeve of the defender that was actually being seen on the goal line. So perhaps that helped the occlusion occur. But 9,000 games before this, countless more incidents beyond that number. And this is the most extraordinary moment that Hawkeye has seen. Bubbles O'Dwyer will be waking up this morning, scratching his head, thinking, God, perhaps that did go over against Kilkenny in 2014, but I guess
more field as well for Brian Hogan, who last summer was convinced that at no point in the 2 points that were given against him for apparently carrying the ball over the line when he caught the ball over the crossbar, I'm sure again he's going to be really questioning this, because on the hurling show last summer we had a couple of assessors on, and they said that, look, it's not a case of there's a laser beam that goes across the 2 posts and once it goes over it triggers something. It's literally based upon their viewing of the camera angles. And what I thought was quite interesting too was, remember last January when we had the incident between Man City and Liverpool where we weren't quite sure if the ball was over the line, and it looked like an eighth of a rotation of the ball was not fully over the line in terms of the goal line technology. It's interesting we didn't see that graphic last night.
Yeah, that is true actually. They usually go to the overhead cartoon version of it, don't they? And
yeah, I was waiting for that to happen. I was thinking, surely the CGI is going to be shown. This is going to be quite awkward if they show this. But maybe just due to the camera angles, and if there was that occlusion, as they say, maybe they weren't able to produce that image. But it just seemed really weird. I was just waiting for something to happen.
So what happened to David Luiz that his view of the ball was occluded last night when Raheem Sterling put Manchester City 1-0 up?
Well, there's probably two theories to this. Like, I'm not going to take credit for the joke, but I saw a lot of people saying on Twitter that David Luiz is like that guy you've got in work who's been told his contract is not being renewed, and he goes in to do as little as possible in the last month when he's in the office. And it did feel a bit like that last night. I mean, he came on, he nearly gave away the ball a couple of times when he got pressed by Man City. Kevin De Bruyne, Eoin, will never play a worse pass into the box this year than the one that he played. Now, like, credit to Raheem Sterling, who continues the run, because when you see that David Luiz should really just get to that ball, Raheem Sterling could have stopped in his tracks, but he continued to move in behind the Arsenal defence and finished the ball pretty well past Leno when it got to him. But, like, David Luiz has to just stop that ball dead. The way he was going at it was just so lazy as well. I know it takes a bit of a zip off the pitch for the control on the first goal, but a professional footballer and a guy who's played international football, who's played for Chelsea twice, who's played for Paris Saint-Germain, should be able to just stop that dead, play a simple pass out, and Arsenal may well get in at half-time at 0-0. Like, we'll talk about it later, I'm sure, when we're with Gary Breen on, that Arsenal didn't show a huge amount of interest or invention during the game anyway. But if David Luiz stops that ball, at least they could get back in. They've already made their couple of injury substitutions. If it's 0-0 at the break, they can go back and reassess for the second half. But once City scored, you got the impression there was no way for Arsenal back into the game. But what a brain fart from David Luiz. Like, that's it. It's just a lack of concentration.
You like to be able to spread the blame evenly when it comes to a particular result occurring, but it's all David Luiz's fault. It really is. It's like the situation that Arsenal had found themselves in. They knew that they were probably going to lose the game at some point. They were going to concede at some point, but the fact that it occurred when it did, it was all David Luiz's fault. And you hate to be too harsh on somebody. And I love defending David Luiz. I've always felt that the sideshow Bob aspect of his character has been overplayed at times, and that he's actually there's a lot more to him than that. And I thought he proved that on occasion this season, where on New Year's Day, for example, that brilliant performance against Manchester United, but that has actually turned out to be the rarity, and I was definitely wrong about David Luiz potentially making a positive difference to Arsenal, because it's not so much the brain farts, it is the way he gets routinely burned, and that happened with the red card. He got burned by Mahrez and had to pull him down. He got burned by Mo Salah early in the season. Do you remember when he got caught in a one-on-one position out on the sideline? How does this keep happening to the guy? It's because he perhaps just isn't at that level consistently, and it's strange. We were talking about it on Sky Sports last night that maybe Antonio Conte's biggest achievement was actually finding a good system for him, that he managed to excel in a Chelsea shirt. And I don't know what that was. It was obviously three at the back and perhaps outstanding defenders alongside him. But the ball-playing David Luiz is the best version of that. But when you get him behind him, when you get one-on-one with him, he's just a complete disaster. And in fairness, before that, Will, like, I think Arsenal probably looked a little bit like a dog who'd been let off the leash for a moment or two, but knowing that it would be put back on the leash whenever they try to play out of defence. Because what would happen is they'd try and play a few nice passes, and after about 4 or 5, it would just end up back at Bernd Leno's feet. And I don't know, is that down to just unbelievable pressing from Manchester City, or Arsenal are just so incompetent at actually passing the ball out of defence that it always felt that the thing was just compressing on them, and the eventuality would be that Manchester City were going to go 1-0 up before the break anyway. But Luiz ensured that happened. But be very interested to get Gary Breen's take on that later on. We were also going to have Brian Kerr on analysis very shortly as well. To make matters worse for Arsenal, I would say there is nothing worse than getting beaten 3-0 at an empty stadium and then Wonderwall plays. Because that is what happens to Arsenal last night. I was like, could this possibly get any worse, where you have to stand there, kind of elbow handshake everybody and listen to Wonderwall after you got beaten 3-0. Terrible, terrible thing. And like, just one final thing on Luiz as well. This is possibly it for his Premier League career, isn't it? Like, he's going to leave the club in the summer and he's got a 3-game ban now. Is he going to be put back in for the final games after he comes back from the suspension? I think time will probably tell, but that is not a guarantee.
No, I mean, you love to defend David Luiz. David Luiz doesn't love to defend, and I think that's probably why he's going to have to find some new employers. It looks like he can't get back to Benfica because they say they're not willing to pay the type of wages he's on. They were talking about €6 million he was potentially looking for if he was to go back to Benfica. So you would imagine he's probably going to be looking further east and possibly going towards the Chinese Super League, which is a pity because Luiz on his day can be a good player. He can be a good player at the base of midfield as a defensive midfielder. As you say with Conte, it worked well when there was a 3 there, but again, I can't see an elite club taking a risk on a player who's over the age of 30, and that's even when there is possibly a lack of top-class central defenders around Europe at the moment.
What did you make of some of the innovations regarding empty stadiums last night? Like, the thing that really stuck out to me was the screens behind the goals at the Etihad Stadium, where you had basically a version of the Brady Bunch, but the Brady Bunch are wearing Manchester City jerseys, sitting behind each goal. Like a slightly disconcerting thing. Like there was clearly a bit of self-awareness going on whenever the camera was positioned in such a way that you could clearly make out the faces of the Zoom call going on behind the goal, and you'd have like fans like clenching their fists and stuff like that, knowing they were on camera, which has increased my faith in humanity, because I would have assumed that somebody would have mooned us or flashed us or something in an ordinary football crowd had they known they were on screen, but that thankfully didn't happen. I do wonder about like the actual positives of it. Like if you're Kevin De Bruyne standing over a free kick, do you want to see like an enlarged version of Darren from Preston in his Manchester City jersey behind the goal before you're taking a free kick? It kind of feels a little bit disconcerting that if there's like an actual full crowd, or at least animated crowd that only the people at home can see, it's a little bit less noticeable, but you've got suddenly 12 massive heads floating behind the goal. A bit confusing, I would have thought.
I did enjoy, and I'm not sure if this again was Man City being self-aware, but a few people pointed out on Twitter that there was a blank screen at different times during the first half in that Zoom call.
All right.
So the joke was that the Etihad can't even sell out the Zoom fans, but everybody's selling it out normally. And like it's a bit weird. It's one of the more unusual ones that have been used, because obviously that's physically in the stadium, because we could see it when we saw the graphics obviously behind the pundits when they were doing the Sky Sports kind of before the game. So yeah, a very, very strange. I mean, obviously we talked yesterday about the glitch that we had in Spain at the weekend, whereby whatever was doing the CGI side of the background actually glitched entirely when they went to a VAR decision, and it took a second or two for the players to reappear back onto the pitch. So everyone is getting used to this from a TV point of view. Again, I listened with the enhanced audio last night. I know it was just kind of a hum in the background, but it still makes the experience feel a little bit less hollow than listening to... I saw a few people said that you could hear Chris Wilder throughout the game between Sheffield United and Aston Villa, and mainly he was just shouting, head it, clear it, that kind of stuff. Well, obviously it's intriguing to maybe listen to for a few minutes. It's a bit like listening to a director's commentary. You kind of just want to see the movie, and I was happy enough to have the fakeness, a bit like being plugged into the Matrix, listening to the background noise as if there was crowd there. And I was happy enough to just pretend it was actually there, because it felt a lot more like the real experience.
I'm happy to kind of realise then that Chris Wilder is actually the incarnation of all of us playing Football Manager, just screaming at the pitch, head it, kick it, that sort of thing. It's that kind of definitely increases the ego a little bit today. Like it's interesting as well watching the television product. It does look like every single television production at the moment is some version of a boy band back on tour, and they're just waiting to release their new hit. Just I don't know, the kind of way, especially David Jones and co kind of faced the camera last night. And then you also have a situation where obviously Eric Garcia suffered that terrible injury yesterday, but during the injury and during the massive stoppage, Pep Guardiola is like completely breaking social distancing protocols by having a long DMC with Phil Foden and then a long DMC with Raheem Sterling. That if you're talking about super spreaders, perhaps Pep Guardiola is a super spreader right there on the sideline, giving one-on-one instructions to all of his players. So they were kind of ignored, and like when Sterling scored, there was like a few elbows and stuff. But I think somebody tried to come in and give him a full high five as well. Like what is the difference in fairness between those sort of things if you're going to be on the same team as them anyway? But there was a few moments when social distancing fell through.
Yeah, there was hugs on the Phil Foden goal too. I mean,
yes.
Again, as you say, if these guys are getting tested regularly and they're being tested week by week, and most of the contact they have is at a training ground whereby the only people they're really having contact with is each other, you'd probably feel safe enough putting your arm around your teammate after a goal's been scored. And there was quite a few kind of fist bumps and close contact after the game too. As you say, Pep Guardiola was doing this classic thing of putting his arms around the shoulders of the players who he was talking to and getting quite close to them. And you also had that weird moment from David Jones at half-time where a Man City pass from one of the subs went slightly astray and the ball landed beside him, and he actually jumped to one side and said, "Oh, under regulations, I can't touch that ball and give it back to you." Kind of a slightly bizarre moment at halftime in the Sky Sports coverage. It's almost like they're trying to be too careful, or to appear too careful, to try and keep up appearances about safety. Because even I think a few times Martin Tyler mentioned that the guys had used the alcohol wash on their hands in the press area. That's like, lads, we don't need this kind of convincing. We know it's as safe as it possibly can be.
Yeah, for sure. There's plenty more on that coming up later on with Gary Breen. Let's tell you the full schedule of what's coming up on OTB AM this morning. We're going to get to Brian Kerr in just a moment for his analysis on Manchester City against Arsenal, and a brilliant chat on racism as well, in the company of Nathan, talking about letters he received as Ireland manager. Gary Breen on the return of football then, coming your way at 8:10 this morning, and the sports pages at 8:35 then, which focuses really on a lot of the football, but also details on the potential return of the League of Ireland as that ball continues to trundle, and racing with Thom Malone at 9 o'clock. Day 3 of Royal Ascot is today. And then finally we're closing things out later on with State of the Union. Keith Wood's look at the state of rugby union all around the world. Right now though, we're hearing from Brian Kerr, who was live on commentary duty with Nathan last night for Off the Ball.
So football is back after 100 days and the world changing utterly. Well, we're back, and Brian Kerr was alongside me for Manchester City's 3-0 victory against Arsenal. Strange night in the commentary box, Brian. No fans. Very different from what we left 3 months ago. How'd you find it?
Bit surreal. Very the strangest situation I was ever in. And look, I've been at lots of matches where there weren't many supporters in my time managing schoolboy teams and playing junior football, and been involved with college teams where, you know, there might be a lot of people, might be 5 or 10 or 20 on the touchline, or when I manage reserve teams. But tonight, when you're used to seeing teams playing in front of big crowds, I mean, I saw Manchester City 3 months ago playing against Manchester United and almost 80,000 people at Old Trafford in a most hostile atmosphere. And tonight was very, very strange indeed. And I thought the game suffered because of that. There was a lack of tempo to the match. You could see the players were off the pace a bit. Their touch was letting them down frequently. The passing wasn't as crisp as normal. I doubt if they were up to full speed fitness levels. We had the interruptions of injuries in the first half. 2 Arsenal players going off in the first half. Eventually Manchester City got the breakthrough. Once they got the second goal, and that whole incident with David Luiz and the foul on Mahrez, the penalty by De Bruyne, the game was over. But it was a very, very strange atmosphere.
Well, if you missed the game, but you've ever seen any Manchester City Arsenal game over the last 3 or 4 years, you know what happened, because City ran riot. It was 3 after a slow enough start from City for the first half an hour. It could have ended up 6 or 7, and a lot of that was down, if not all of it, to David Luiz, who was one of the players who came on, played 25 minutes. Terrible mistake for the first goal just before half time. Gave away the penalty kick right at the start of the second half. Sent off. De Bruyne scores. How is this player at a club of the stature of Arsenal?
Well, he's had a very, I wouldn't say a solid career, but he's had a career at a very high level, and he's part of teams that won trophies and successful at Chelsea, a couple of times at Chelsea and time at Benfica. And it was a strange one that he went to Arsenal. It was a strange signing, I felt, for Arsenal in the first place. But what Arsenal need more than anything, without a shadow of a doubt, is reliability in the centre of the defence. They've been crying out for that for the last few years, and they've never been able to achieve it. I think Callum Chambers would be a very important player for them if he was fit. Unfortunately, he's not available to them. But all of the other players that they've used in centre-back position have proved to be unreliable, inconsistent, too slow, caught out of position, often got too high up the pitch and not got the pace to recover quickly enough. Tonight we didn't see that so much because they were back fairly deep and fairly compact for most of the first half of the game. Mustafi and Marty started as the pairing, another new centre half brought in by this manager, you'd have to say, who was playing in Brazil for Flamengo. He's been around Europe, played for several not top teams, I'd say, around Europe, but he didn't look the part, I thought. He didn't look majorly mobile or comfortable. And he wasn't helped by Tierney, I think, his inexperience and his lack of football. Even before the lockdown, he hadn't played many matches either. He's had a bad start to his career with Arsenal, unfortunately, with injuries, but he's a lot of potential. So the back four looked okay because there was a good bit of protection. At times we saw Nketiah, who was the centre forward in the most advanced position, often deep in his own half, helping out the defence. But they were only getting away with it, and it looked like the goal was going to come. Leno made several good saves where Sterling got in behind defence, David Silva got in behind defence, De Bruyne got in, and Mahrez got in. And the goal, it came out of a mistake, but it was on the way anyway.
But like this was
horrendous mistakes.
This was Phoenix Park stuff.
At this level. Well, I'd say even worse. It depends on what division you're watching in the Phoenix Park.
What division? Careful who you're insulting here.
Yeah. Well, I won't go, United Churches League or Leinster Junior Division 5. I think, any manager, any level, would have expected, once the centre half got across to that position, he would have dealt with the little ball in behind by De Bruyne for the diagonal run of Sterling.
But the last minute of injury time in the first half, you just get rid of it.
Yeah, just get there and make it and deal with it. But he didn't deal with it. Sterling was in behind him, and he smashed it into the net with his right foot. Lovely finish, and it's been a good week for Sterling, I think, but a really good finish in the end. But it was made so easy, a horrendous mistake.
It was a good week for Raheem Sterling, and it feels as though it was appropriate that he scored the first goal of the restart, and it was quite powerful at the start of the game, which we saw in both matches today. The game kicks off, and for the first 10 seconds, everybody, the players and the referee, take a knee. And the football at the start of this crisis, it felt as though it was been hung out to dry in some ways by the British government, and they wanted to hang football out to dry. With what Marcus Rashford has done over the last 48 hours, the way Raheem Sterling has held himself, and the way football seems to have come together, how would you assess what's gone on?
I'm happy to see what's happening, but my feeling is it's an awful lot very, very late. Why didn't this happen years ago when people felt, black players and the black populations of the world must have felt very sore at how people behaved towards them and how governments discriminated towards them. But the general population, not all of the general population, but there was a latent racism there, but also an obvious racism and a blatant racism. And it's not been dealt with by governments, it's not been dealt by people, it's not been dealt with by society, and it's not been dealt with by sport. In fact, we saw issues in American football in recent years where players who tried to take a stand were penalised by the owners and were abused by the politicians. That's not so long ago. So this may be a turning point, but I'm kind of sad that it's happening so late, and I hope what's happening now won't just become, that happened a while back and we all forget about it. We move on when there's something else major happens in the world, another pandemic arrives, or there's another horrible thing happens in the world, maybe a plane crash or an earthquake or something like that. This has got to be a changing time for society and for people across the board to take it on board in every part of society. As I heard somebody say the other day, children are not born racist, so people learn to be racist from the behaviour of others in their society. And we've all got to be brave enough to stand up and say, no, that isn't good enough. And I've even examined my own conscience about it in recent days. Did I not, although I've been involved with Sardi for many, many years, and I've always been conscious of the issue and always tried to do something, tried to help and tried to work around it. Maybe I should have been more outspoken when I was manager of the Irish team, and there was a lot of hate mail sent to me, which I didn't actually receive because it was intercepted by my PA in the FAI, Etna, who was very good at dealing with it and passed it on to the guards at the time. But maybe if I had read it, maybe and saw...
And what was it about?
It was about, as I understood, it was about the fact that we had black players in the team. At the time, Clinton Morrison and Stephen Reid were in the team, or were around the squad. Clinton was playing regularly, Stephen was in and out. But Stephen had been very much part of the Irish teams at that time. But also about the fact that I had black staff at the time, which was, I had Chris Houghton and Adam Bucks. Now, both of them, I recruited them because of their ability. One as a coach and the other as a masseur, psychologist, counsellor. But both of them because of their ability. But I was also aware that the staff was quite representative of the team. In the makeup of the team, we had black players, and Irish teams have had black players for many years now. But so the staff should have black people in it too. So I was conscious, but maybe I should have spoken out more about that, or maybe even going back in my time as a manager of Pats when Curtis Fleming was playing, when Paul Ozan was playing, and where Pats had Paul McGrath played before that, and since then they had lots of other players, and Joseph Ndoh and Charles Mbasi Livingston. And other players that played around the league. Did we all kind of sit idly by and just kind of pass it off and say, oh, well, it wasn't bad. There was a bit of stick from the crowd. And did we just let it go? But it wasn't too bad, really.
Wasn't too bad for us.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad for us.
I thought it was... Jason Sherlock made a very good point on the Sunday game last week where he spoke about remembering every single racist incident that has happened throughout his life. And there were many of them. And we Curtis Fleming on the show today, actually, who spoke so powerfully about what he'd been through during his career, and even to this present day, and the struggle to get a job at times, and has had to go to far-flung parts of the world to get a job. But we've heard from a lot of sports people over the last few weeks, Irish sports people, and a definite realisation that it's not something that happens somewhere else in the world. It happens on our doorsteps every single day.
And can I say... on that, Nathan, that Saturday and the work we have done over many, many years, we have tried to make people aware of it at government level.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you about, Saturday.
At the highest level of Irish society, government, politicians, and the governing bodies of sports, which in fairness to them have reacted quite well. But I have to say that governments... and many governments haven't taken on the responsibility to support organisations like SARI. They've paid lip service to the fact that there has been lots and lots of racism out there in Irish sport and in Irish society. And I heard Minister Staunton talking about it today, and talking about a committee that they formed in June last year, and they're about to meet shortly. A year on, it's taken to have a meeting on a committee that's supposed to be put together to deal with racism in Irish society. How negligent is that? That's how much they cared about it. And this has frustrated people like me and lots of other people in Irish society, but people who are involved, in the committees that I've been involved in, have been so frustrated about issues like direct provision, racism, the treatment of immigrants, attitudes towards immigrants. But, there is a massive issue out there. There's another view. There are lots of people with very, very troubling views on attitudes towards immigrants and people who are different in any way to the regular Irish person, the traditional Irish person, what he looks like and what he sounds like. And we have an opportunity now to take some radical action and be prepared to do it. And hopefully the new government will take on board the messages that are out there. The messages that are out there from sports people like Raheem Sterling and what he's done, and many of his colleagues, and Marcus Rashford, and all the sports people around the world who have been affected by this issue.
With your work in Surrey then, and you talk about that other part of society that maybe feels emboldened, or do they feel emboldened by the governmental attitude towards black people and direct provision, and the way that they are treated like second-class citizens when they come to the country by the government? So, in a way, is it understandable a certain part of the country look at people like that when that's the way they're treated?
Well, I think they've got away with not being called out. I mean, we've had a situation where it was mentioned. I heard some of Eoin O'Riordan's speech in the Dáil today, where he spoke about some of the attitudes around the people who were elected to that house, and some of the government, the House of the Dáil, and some of the things that were said by people who were elected in Ireland in recent years. Now, they were elected by other people who may have similar views, and that's a worrying part too. But I think the people who have a, let's say, a rational view of this and a clear view of right and wrong need to call these people out and be prepared to get involved in the argument, and not be sitting under a rock or hiding behind the couch and saying, well, that's just your man having a bit of a go to win a few votes. I think they've got to be nailed on it. And I think the opportunity is there now, because, a lot of people will get away with a lot of fairly abusive stuff online, on the internet, hiding behind false names and false addresses and so on. But I think we need some really strong laws to deal with it, and the government have failed to do that. There's been a lot of talk about stronger laws, but they haven't got there yet.
Maybe you could be one of those calling them out when you look at your profile, and also the work you have done with Sari through the years, the knowledge you have, the inequalities you've seen. Like, is it something that...
Well, I've tried to work as best as I can with the people who've asked me to help them out, and I think I've also tried to behave in a manner. I mean, that's why I've delved into my own conscience. And you mentioned Curtis there today. I was speaking to Dave Kelly, that a very, very esteemed journalist with the Irish Independent yesterday, who texted me to say he was going to talk to Curtis this week, and I said, ask him some questions about when he was with St. Pat's and how he felt. Did he feel minded? Did he feel protected? Because that was certainly part of something that I tried to bring into the club, not in a very obvious way, but just in the way we made it a very open place to black players, that's for sure. And I mean, I've always felt that way about St. Patrick's Athletic, and I know other clubs have had that around the league of Ireland. I've had that attitude. We've had lots of smashing black players that have added grace and ability and style to our league for many, many years. Some beautiful players that were appreciated by the crowds at many different clubs. But they've also, and you mentioned Curtis, they've had to put up with abuse that was probably kicked under the carpet a little bit, and people didn't take too much notice and just say, that was only a few people in the crowd. But those few people need to be called out. And people at Sardi for many years have said that the main organisation for football in Europe, UEFA, have been far too lenient in how they have dealt with racist issues. They have, given organisations, they've given clubs, they've given countries, they've given FAs a slap on the wrist, small fines, partial closure of grounds, but they've never really taken strong action. And then several associations, instead of penalise players for walking off the pitch, we've seen that in Italy and Spain in the past, instead of the association defending the players and standing up against the racists and standing up against the clubs who don't educate their own fans in the way they should, they have taken the side of the clubs against the players, and that has at times deflated me and deflated people who are in this area and who work in this area and who are part of the FAIR group, which is Football Against Racism Across Europe, which is an amalgamation of lots of different similarly minded groups to, say, Show Racism Red Card, Sardi, and many similar organisations in countries across Europe, in Poland, in Russia, in the obvious European countries and maybe the less obvious Europe, and I mean less obvious in countries where there are nationalistic tendencies, where there's societal victimisation of black people, where there's continuous racism shown towards any black players, and it seems to be a bit of a laugh and a bit of a game, and sure we go to the game and just abuse the black lads and get on with it. I mean, there are organisations working hard to change that, but they need the support of the governments and of the governing bodies and of the likes of UEFA and FIFA. Do people realise that FIFA abandoned their anti-racism committee in 2016 because they said their work was done? There was no more work to do. Can you believe that? In 2016, they disbanded that committee. Now, how dark is that? How ridiculous is that? How stupid they must be feeling, those people that made those decisions. So now maybe FIFA will wake up and get right behind what seems to be a world movement that's suddenly come about to what's happening in the George Floyd incident.
Yeah, I think we'll come back to this another day, Brian, and get your thoughts, because you've obviously been deeply involved in it, and I think you've got a lot to offer to it. So we might get you in studio at some time over the next few weeks and get a few.
Well, I'd be glad. I'm not an expert in the field by any means, but it's something that I felt strongly about for a number of years. Well, basically all my life, I've always felt I can't understand that attitude. I can't understand the attitude of people having a view of looking at somebody and saying they're different, so I think it's all right to have a go and abuse them.
All right, good stuff, Brian.
Thank you, Nathan. Thanks for giving me a run on it.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station. Off the ball.
Salah takes the shot. Oh, Mo Salah with one of the goals of the season. 25 yards out.
If you throw your lot in and play senior international football with somebody, that should be the end of it.
That's brilliant. Oh, my goodness me. You will not see a better try.
Who will be All-Ireland champions? Who will see their dreams turn into reality? Whose names will be etched in history forever?
OTB Live. Never miss the action, right here, every Saturday and Sunday on Off the Ball.
OTB AM.
You're welcome back. 6 minutes past 8 on this Thursday morning. And if you're just joining us, the main story this morning is not so much the football from last night, but Brian Kerr in conversation with Nathan Murphy there on the topic of racism in Irish football. There was a lot of hate mail sent to me, he said. As I understood it, the letters were about the fact that we had black players in the team. Also, I had black players of staff at the time in Chris Hughton and Adam Bucks. That is just one of the incredibly strong lines from Brian Kerr last night. The full piece already available now on our YouTube channel. Will, this is not surprising from Brian Kerr that he speaks out on subjects like this. He is one of the best speakers in Irish football when it comes to verbalising these sort of things and recounting these experiences. He has spoken about this in the past, is an important step at the moment because, as he has pointed out, this does feel like a very, very significant movement.
Yeah, and look, Brian Kerr doesn't just talk the talk, he walks the walk when it comes to this. He's been involved in Surrey for almost as long as I can remember. I mean, it's obviously not totally surprising, some of the stories that were brought up, particularly those letters that would have been sent in, I'm guessing, around 2003, 2004. But probably the most disappointing thing is that they were sent in so much towards the recent past. Like, you would have hoped that you wouldn't have someone at home. And obviously this is one person as opposed to it being, you know, a load of people sending things in on a consistent basis. But incredibly disappointing that, you know, that Brian Kerr would have to deal with that as Republic of Ireland manager, that his PA would have to deal with reading such comments about players of colour who were on the Republic of Ireland squad at the time, and 2 members of Brian Kerr's backroom team. I mean, it's very clear that since the George Floyd incident, Brian has also been doing a lot of self-reflection, and what stood out for me was him saying, you know, could I have done more, is the way that he's kind of thinking about this. And I think it has probably caused us all to reflect a bit. You know, when the 2016 protests happened in the NFL, they kind of came and went pretty quickly, and the narrative was changed towards it being about the flag being respected as opposed to looking at the underlying issues that were there. But I think we've looked nearly a month now at this point since George Floyd passed away. We have been doing a lot of self-reflection, I think, within sport about the role of race. And we saw something that I never expected the Premier League would allow happen over the first 12 games of this campaign. Black Lives Matters on the back of every jersey. And there were 2 kind of silent protests that took place before the games last night. And I'm sure that will be replicated across all of the games this weekend. Raheem Sterling was asked about it after the game on Sky Sports, and he was saying that it feels more like a movement as opposed to a few people now speaking out about it. And he was very quick to praise the white players and the players of different nationalities who were involved in the squads for taking part in just that kind of slight vigil before the game started last night. Everyone just taking a knee, the referee and the coaches too. And it's a very powerful symbol, and sometimes symbolism is very important. We talked yesterday about how important Marcus Rashford speaking out was and how he was able to cause a U-turn in thinking in the Tory government around the school lunches being given out to children. And football has a very powerful role to play. I mean, a lot of eyeballs would have been on the Premier League last night.
Yeah, for sure. Like, who would have thought that a few years ago we would have been in a situation where every single person on the pitch of a Premier League game would be taking a knee, given the Colin Kaepernick situation. And like, you're right, a few years ago, not only did it quickly become something very different, it came about respecting the flag or not, which was or respecting the troops, I should say, which was not anywhere near.
Complete misnomer. Yeah.
It was nothing to do with what the initial protest was, but it also became quite political very, very quickly. And I think that obviously this became political quickly as well, but I think I think the images and the videos that people had seen were so deep-rooted from a very early point that this wasn't just going to become a point at the United States and look how crazy all their politicians have reacted to this and how they are being outwardly racist at times. This has just kind of become a period of self-reflection, I think, where we're all like, hold on a minute, what can we be doing a lot better? And I think, in fairness, a lot of Irish people were on the case quite quickly when the George Floyd video came out. It was like, what can we be doing a little bit better? And obviously that was the same in Britain. That was obviously the same within the sporting community in Britain, and they felt that something needed to change. And like, it only feels like a very, very short time ago, because it is a short time ago, when you see football fans outwardly racially abusing Raheem Sterling in the ground, for example, and he is one of a huge number of footballers that we have seen explicitly get racial abuse, and that's just because we catch them at the front row of a Premier League ground. We don't know all the other stuff that goes unsaid, and I think those moments are kind of important where we start to realise how prevalent this has been in sporting arenas, and when you hear Brian Kerr talk about that, how prevalent it's been in an Irish sporting arena, because not only do we tend to point a finger at the United States sometimes, I think we kind of do the same thing when it comes to the UK, and it's really important that a former Ireland manager is coming out to say these sort of things.
Yeah, and look, I think there's a few very important points that Brian makes too. In terms of all of us who go along as supporters to watch football games, if we do care about racial equality, and if we do care about players of colour not being abused on a football pitch, we can't afford to be in the stand and just tut when we hear someone shouting something towards the pitch. You have to call that person out. I mean, that is something that has been very clear, that not being racist yourself feels like it's not enough anymore. You now have to be there to openly challenge people who have views that are abhorrent, and no player should have to endure that kind of abuse. And like, it's interesting, you mentioned Raheem Sterling being abused, and remember Tyrone Mings as well, when England went to Bulgaria to play in a qualifier in just the recent qualifiers for this World Cup. And like Brian said, I mean, the punishment from UEFA was effectively a slap on the wrist. Like, there's very little actual deterrent for teams or for countries. They might have to play one game behind closed doors or with limited fans, but then they kind of reset and they go back again, and they can potentially do exactly the same thing the next time a team comes to their ground. And like, it's not that long ago, Samuel Eto'o, a month ago, 14 years ago, tried to walk off the pitch when he was abused when Barcelona were playing Zaragoza. And Samuel Eto'o was actually stopped by players on his own team from walking off the pitch. He made every attempt to do so. And then he was later rewarded with a bravery award from UEFA. So, like, instead of UEFA heavily punishing Zaragoza for what happened to Samuel Eto'o, it's kind of like, well, good lad, you made a bit of a stand, but you didn't walk off the pitch. And now let's just ruffle your hair and continue on. Like, there's never really kind of been strength from above. And as Brian mentioned, FIFA disassembled their anti-racism division not too long ago. I think it was 2014 or 2015. And what kind of message did that send out at a time when they should be doing everything possible to try and stamp out racism? So I think that kind of leadership is needed from the top too. Like, I mean, it's down from the bottom up. We have to make sure these things aren't happening in grounds, and also from the very top, they have to put in realistic punishments if players are subject to racist abuse during games.
Absolutely. Let's tell you what's coming up again on OTB AM this morning. We're going to get to Gary Breen very shortly for his reaction to all the football last night, and we'll also get his memories of working under Brian Kerr at a time when Brian Kerr was receiving racist letters from Irish supporters. 8:35 then, the sports pages coming your way. Loads of coverage of Luiz's nightmare, for example, last night, and the other football storylines. Royal Ascot with Thom Malone at 9:05. And State of the Union with Keith Wood is coming up very shortly indeed as well. Last night, though, it was a big night for Off the Ball because football was back. Here is the oral goodness from Nathan Murphy and Brian Kerr.
Comes to De Bruyne on this near side, the City right. Oh, Luiz doesn't get a good touch there, and a chance for Raheem Sterling, who smashes it into the back of the net. It's an absolute shocker from David Luiz, and he has been rightly punished by Raheem Sterling. And Arsenal, having kept themselves in this game for so long in the first half, well, David Luiz, the substitutes, had a right old horror show there. Missed their last 4 Premier League penalties, Manchester City, but De Bruyne makes no mistake this time, low into the right-hand corner. And Manchester City lead Arsenal by 2-0. Kevin De Bruyne with the goal from the penalty spot, sent Leno the wrong way. Raheem Sterling back to Aguero inside the area. Sergio Aguero, oh, he hits the post, and there's a chance for Phil Foden, who fires in the rebound for 6 yards out. And Manchester City get their 3rd goal, and you can see what it means to Phil Foden. Sergio Aguero, the player who always seems to score against Arsenal, so close, denied by the woodwork when he was set up by Sterling, but it rebounded beautifully into the path of Phil Foden, and the 20-year-old fired home, couldn't miss from close range. And well, we talked up Arsenal, but Manchester City get their 3rd, and you've got to say it's the very least they deserve in this game.
Yeah, we're going to be getting to Gary Breen in just a moment. What was the best thing about Manchester City's performance last night, Will, in your opinion?
I think the fact they were pretty ruthless on after they got the chance in the game. I mean, Sterling gets the first goal, which was coming because Bernd Leno had made a couple of good saves. He got down well when Riyad Mahrez was put in behind. He palmed one around the post from Raheem Sterling and made a pretty good save from David Silva, which he would have seen quite late because David Silva's reverse shot back across came through the defender's legs. I think it was Mahrez's legs, and he had to kind of make it down cleverly to make a good save there too. So City were kind of bashing away in the first half. They didn't quite find their rhythm maybe for the first 25 minutes, half an hour. But once they got into a position early in the second half, when they went 2-0 up and when David Luiz was sent off, they just continued to attack and attack and attack. And on a different night, Sergio Aguero hits the post, hits the side netting. Phil Foden eventually gets their 3rd goal in the 11 minutes of injury time. But I think Pep Guardiola will be happy that they didn't have to exert a massive amount of energy in terms of a 3-0 victory, but also that his players continued to make chances throughout that second half. And one of the most exciting things is how good is Ederson's long-range passing. Like ridiculous the pass he made, which led to the penalty, also led to a big chance for Riyad Mahrez, which was headed back down. He can just ping one from about 70 yards and create an attack from a defensive position. So apparently Gary Neville was saying in commentary that he just practices them continually in the pre-match routine, and he's just remarkably good at picking out the coaches when he's playing those passes. So I'd love to get to the Etihad at some point and see how good he is at actually making them when he's doing his warm-up. But last night he was almost like having an extra quarterback on the pitch with some of the passes he played forward. So very, very comprehensive for City, very easy win, and it feels like this is what they do to Arsenal all the time.
The great irony of last night was that Gary Neville was almost like a hype man for Manchester City and buying tickets to go watch Manchester City, because he kept being like, you have to be here for the match, you have to watch him do his warm-up. If you're going to be here at the Etihad, there's only one person you want to watch, and it's Ederson.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I think we should probably appreciate one of the best players in Premier League history in David Silva, who's now heading into his last 10 games as a player in the English top flight. All expectation is that he's going to Qatar now. There were rumours that he was going to go to Miami. Remarkably, he's got one of the best hair plug jobs ever done in the last couple of years. He looks more like his hair of 21 as opposed to a guy heading into his mid-30s after his bald phase. But you watched him and Kevin De Bruyne going to work at times last night, and Arsenal didn't pick a midfield which was particularly well set up to get the foot in and make tackles. Guendouzi and Ceballos were both there to try and pass the ball out, and City were just happy to play on the half turn. David Silva and Kevin De Bruyne made so much space for each other. They linked up so wonderfully, and we'll see Phil Foden, who we saw a picture of a moment ago when we heard the commentary, how he's going to step into the team when David Silva leaves, because City, I'd say, are unlikely to go out and spend big in that sector of the field. So Phil Foden should get more chances when David Silva goes, but I'm going to miss him massively playing in the Premier League and playing in one of Europe's top flight leagues when he does go off to earn a bit of cash at the end of his career, maybe for the next 2 seasons.
Yeah, like Pep Guardiola was saying beforehand that we're not ready. We're only at 70% fitness or whatever it is. We're not going to be anywhere near the pitch of the game. So it's kind of terrifying what they're actually going to be at once things kind of trundle to a full throttle over the next little while. If they get their Champions League ban reduced to 1 year even, and if they manage to keep that squad together, You suspect that there will be a title race next year. It's not going to be all Liverpool's way, that Manchester City have a much bigger height to get to. I think we're going to get to Gary Breen. We are indeed. Just to tell you that Newcastle against Sheffield United is live and off the ball on Sunday at 2 o'clock, and Villa against Chelsea is our other game on Sunday at 4:15. Gary, good morning.
Good morning.
Let's start with Manchester City before we get into Arsenal, because let's fill ourselves up with positivity on OTB AM this morning. How good were they last night?
Well, they were so good. What we normally seen, but the standout performer again was Kevin De Bruyne. He was amazing. I mean, I just generally don't think there's a better midfield in the world right now in terms of the level that he's playing at. I think there were times where Arsenal under Arteta would know trying to stifle getting the ball into that central midfield area. Arteta had his front three narrow to encourage City to go wide. But there were times even when he had men around and he'd pass in the ball, suddenly let the ball run across his body. He'd drive with that power and pace he has, and in that quality on his pass, Arsenal struggled. But to be perfectly honest, I think most teams would against him. Yeah, for sure. Are you surprised by how quickly De Bruyne looked to be at the pitch required for Premier League? No, not really, because I genuinely believe that footballers now are fit 12 months of the year. I think they don't take much now to get back. I think gone are the days where you need a long pre-season. I know this is a longer break than most players would ever have, because even in the off-season, more often than not, they'll be playing international football. But I just think with the sports scientists, how players look after themselves, no, I'm not surprised at all, really. Yeah, it looked like everybody across the two games was in really, really good shape. The pace in both games was excellent. I'm not sure is it because we just have a closer affinity to Premier League teams, but it felt like a far more enjoyable evening of football than anything bar, say, Borussia Dortmund versus Bayern Munich has produced in Spain and Germany over the past month. Yeah, absolutely. We want to see this, this league back, and I felt it was a strange scenario because you could listen to the game without the kind of false crowd noises as such, or with it, and I much preferred listening to it with it. I know that it's contrived as such, but it didn't feel that different. I think more often than not, you're focusing on the game, not necessarily what's happening in the stadium, but the stadium's atmosphere, of course, is going to be a huge miss, but I think it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. Let's go on to Arsenal. What went wrong for them last night? Is all the blame on the shoulders of David Luiz primarily here? No, not really. I don't think he's fully to blame. Of course, he's cost his team yesterday, but if it wasn't him, it could have been Xhaka. If it wasn't Xhaka, it could have been Ozil. They're just reverting to type. It's the same story. And they've got too many players of extremes where on their day they're good, but when they're bad, they're so bad. And that's the problem that you have, is that this isn't just around David Luiz. How he performed last night was no major surprise. It really wasn't. And you've got him, Ozil, Kolasinac, Mustafi, Xhaka. It's the same problem. And as good as Arteta looks like he potentially can be as a coach in terms of organising them, which I think he has done, I think it's been very noticeable the difference he has made in terms of trying to make him compact. But these players will revert to type. And it's frustrating because in this long layoff, you want to come back and be positive again, but you just can't ignore the fact that they'll just continually make the same mistakes. And everyone talks about Mustafi in terms of the errors that he made leading to that first goal. But even Mustafi, I'm looking at that situation, and we talked about Kevin De Bruyne. As soon as Kevin De Bruyne gets that ball in that wide right position, I don't care where he is or how far out he is, as a centre-half, you've got to think we're in trouble here because he has got such ability to whip those balls in. But if you watch Mustafi's role, at no stage does he look over his right shoulder to see if there's a run coming. He's square on, totally oblivious to the fact that Sterling is coming in. Now, the ball in isn't particularly good, or certainly by the high standards of Kevin De Bruyne. But nevertheless, if it was, Sterling would have had a free attempt on goal. So this is the problems that Arteta is working with. That as much as he tries to coach these bad errors out of them, they will continue to rear their ugly head. So, sorry, go on, Will.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Gary, as much as obviously the focus goes on the error that David Luiz has made, there was a feeling that goal was coming because City had got in behind 2 or 3 times in the 5 or 7 minutes before the goal. It was just a case of Arsenal trying to hang on towards half-time.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what's so frustrating as a coach, is that you're thinking, listen, we are literally hanging on here. There's a minute to go. Well, effectively, there was 15 seconds to go before that error, and you're thinking that's when your centre-half just have to be safe and be reliable. And then they're just not. But for the goalkeeper, Leno, City would have been 3 up at that stage anyway. And that's not necessarily a criticism of Arsenal, because City can do that to any team in the world. and that's the quality with which they're playing with. But the mistakes that we saw last night are just mistakes that you see continually, and we have done for years. Even on that third goal, if you look back, and I'm reluctant to say about Mustafi because I think he's got great character. He keeps coming back, makes mistakes, keeps coming back and trying his best as such. But even on that third goal, they're retreating as a defence. He's pointing to his teammates, telling them where to go. But effectively, it's his man, Aguero, who receives the ball to get the strike on goal after he falls over. And I know it's Foden then taps it in after it comes off the post, but it's such a difficult situation. I was listening to Brian just previously, and he's saying, listen, they really need Chambers to come back. This is the guy, Chambers, who Arsenal discarded, went on loan to Fulham, and they didn't even play him at centre-half. They played him in midfield because you can't trust him at the back. So are Arsenal really relying on him? That's incredible. I want to see Saliba's coming in terms of them buying him from the French League last season and loaning him back. He's very young. I think Holden is probably the one that I'd like to see come back. But there's massive problems there. Arsenal are not going to have the financial muscle to go out and buy a ready-made centre-half. So they're going to have to be creative. They're going to have to try and create one within their group. But I'm afraid that the likes of Mustafi, Luiz, Socrates, there's not one there.
How did Antonio Conte get a Premier League winning defender out of David Luiz?
Well, listen, and I've said this to you so many times, and I've said it in commentary of Arsenal, David Luiz has incredible attributes. He genuinely does. In terms of his physicality, his ability on the ball, he's a strong man, he's powerful. But ultimately, what you do with someone like David Luiz and what Conte done is that you just negate the space that he works in. You condense it so much that he doesn't have to really make decisions. He just can be reactionary, and you don't allow the opposition to get at him. If you think about it, in the back three, he's got Azpilicueta so narrow to him on the right-hand side. He's got Cahill on the left-hand side. So that pocket of area that he's working in as a centre-half is actually very small. But then you add on the big difference is that N'Golo Conte is in front of him screening. So effectively, you can't get balls into centre-forward's feet because this is a problem. When David Luiz has to make decisions whether or not to go short or protect the space, he invariably makes the wrong decision time and time again. And this is the frustration. I think there's too many players now at Arsenal where when you set up a team, and certainly Arteta has done that as soon as he's gone there, you want to play to their strengths and protect their weaknesses. And I think at times Arteta has done that. But the problem is that there are too many players who have too many weaknesses. And as a collective, it just doesn't work. And I think Arteta's got to really strip it back. I think these last 9 games, and certainly the games he had prior to the lockdown, gives him a really big chance to reflect and say, listen, these players, no matter how good a coach you are, they are not going to get Arsenal back to where he hopes they will be.
No, and
Arsenal have to make a decision in the next couple of weeks, Gary, about what happens with David Luiz. Given, as you said, there's not too many ready-made centre-backs that they could purchase around Europe at the moment. Is there any chance they say, right, let's trigger this 12 months?
Well, no, listen, in terms of listening to the interview afterwards, where David Luiz will come out and people will say, listen, at least he come out and held his hand up. It was too self-serving, in my opinion. That I've seen that so many times again, where players who make mistakes and go, sorry, as if that deals with it. I said sorry. Just don't make the mistakes, or don't make the same mistakes. Learn from them. But I think the leadership of certainly Arsenal, in terms of the hierarchy, has got to be better than it has been. Because ultimately, I look at that decision to pay. If they don't take that option up, which I don't think they will, listening to those interviews, that's the argument Luiz and Arteta are having. If they don't, effectively, they've paid £8 million for a centre-half, and then on top of that, wages, which would have been top wages, for a centre-half to play for 1 season. That club is just letting millions drip out of the club on hemorrhaging money. It's incredible. You look at that and it's investment alone. Maybe you do that for a goal scorer, someone who really affects it, but you certainly wouldn't do it for a centre-half who is at the complete other spectrum of what you need in terms of reliability. So I look at that leadership now at Arsenal in terms of what's happening again with Aubameyang, which we've seen over the years. We've seen so many players leave for a fraction of their worth, Ramsey, and you think they would learn, and I think they will learn on the situation that they backed Ozil for the big contract over Ramsey, and that's been a massive mistake because this is the problems you're having. We're not even talking about the issues that you have on the pitch with these players, but with Ozil, it's just another manager now is not even taking him with the squads. There's going to have to be a moment when Ozil thinks, well, listen, it can't be the manager's fault because every manager is doing this to me at the moment. And I'm a massive fan of Ozil's. I really am in terms of what he can do. But I think when the negatives start to outweigh the positives, which so many of men players is happening at Arsenal, then I think you just have to bite the bullet.
I think it's 5 years now since they've won away against one of the big six in the Premier League. That's 25 games, 0 wins. In commentary last night, Gary Neville said a big cultural shift is required to change that. He's not wrong, Gary. The question is, how do you go about that? So this is a question, if you forget about the finances, forget about what they can't do in the transfer market, how can Mikel Arteta affect a cultural shift at a club?
Well, I think he is doing that. I genuinely do think about that. I think initially when he comes in, a few players were discarded. What's the young midfielder with the hair of David Luiz? I can't forget. Guendouzi, of course, yeah. So he plays last night. But initially when he comes in and everyone's saying, well, Guendouzi's been a really good signing, he didn't have the discipline that he wanted from centre midfield, so he discarded him a little bit, didn't he? He kept him away from the squad. So he's flexed these muscles there, Arteta. And I think he will do. I think he's going to make a decision now that these players, as good as they can be on their day, are not consistent enough, because you're talking about Arsenal. We're not talking about a mid-table Arsenal team, although when you look at them, it does look like that. So I think he will change the culture. I genuinely believe that. I think he's been quite vocal now to say that he will need support in the transfer market, but I don't think he'll be able to compete with the big boys. We know that. Of course, they're not going to get in the Champions League, so they're going to have that shortfall in money again. They might not even make the Europa League, which is a massive shortfall again. So I think he needs to build that. I think he's talking a lot about this quality in the Arsenal youth teams coming through. The very fact he's playing Nketiah all the time suggests that he wants to go with the younger players. We've got Martinelli as well. So I think he's just going to have to go down that route and create a culture that he can really influence, not with players who are 28, 29, who are set in their ways as such, who don't really want to buy into the new manager. Although when you listen to David Luiz last night, he was waxing lyrical about the coach, wasn't he, in terms of how good he is. So I do think there are positive strides going forward, but I think that the squad that he's inherited, like with Emery, is just not at the level required to play for Arsenal. Yeah,
it doesn't look good. Just one last question on that game, Gary, and this could be potentially as much to do with credit for Manchester City as it is a stick to beat Arsenal with. Just it seemed when Arsenal were trying to play out of the back last night, it was 4 passes and the ball was back at Bernleno's feet and they couldn't really get out of their own box at times. It looked terrible. It looked like their entire passing out of the back system had completely broken down. But at the same time, it seemed that there were blue shirts everywhere. I appreciate watching it on television and not being at the stadium doesn't give us a full picture of how good Manchester City were in terms of pressing. But who is to blame or who is to credit there for this sort of breakdown and being unable to get out from the back?
Well, I don't think Guardiola's teams, and I've said this consistently, get enough credit for how difficult they are to play through. We obviously admire their skill set, how good they are, but they're so good without the ball. Kevin De Bruyne, again, we talk about how good he is with the ball, but just watch how good he is without in terms of hunting down. But that's just not about desire. That's not just about closing down. That's organisation. That's coaching. And I think Arteta, I felt Arsenal done it well in the first 15 minutes. Arsenal had 50% possession, which is not the norm away to City. Those front three were narrow, encouraged City to go back. So there was a control about them. But the reality is, in terms of trying to play out from the back for Arsenal, the breakdown will always be that you can't play out through Guendouzi. You can't play on the half turn. If you think about his skill set, is running around, he's athletic and stuff like that. But he can't play on the half turn and get you out comfortably. That's why Arteta made a big deal about bringing Xhaka back in when that massive fallout with the crowd, because he knows for all his sins, he can do that. He can play on the half turn. He can play and make passes and break lines. Likewise, Torreira. I'm a massive fan of his, but you can't play through him either. And that's the difference. If you look about the centre midfielders of City, who at times over the years has been David Silva, De Bruyne, effectively considered wide players initially, but now have come into those central areas. All of their players, whoever plays centre midfield, can play on a half turn. You can literally give them the ball with a player right behind them and know that they're not going to lose that. You can't do that with your Arsenal midfielders.
Is there anything that stuck out to you from Aston Villa against Sheffield United outside of the obvious complete cock-up on the Hawkeye front?
Yeah, I think I noticed, I thought Keenan Davis, centre forward, gave John Egan a tough time. I'm a massive fan of John Egan's, but I do genuinely believe that centre halves take a bit longer to get into their rhythm, your timing and stuff like that. And perhaps that was why David Luiz didn't pick up the bounce of the ball particularly well. I do think that takes time. Right. I like the look of him. That looks good for Villa. But I just couldn't catch my breath, Eoin, in terms of what happened there. Because when you're watching the game, and you can clearly see the ball's gone over the line, But as soon as the referee does that, the watch signal, you think, oh, he didn't then. I must have been deceived. And for that watch to break down and not give the right decision on the first game back is staggering, because Hawkeye, gold line technology, whatever they call it, has been one of the best additions to football. And for it to break down in the first game, it's just incredible.
It really is. It's an interesting point you make about central defenders perhaps being the ones who will look the worst during this comeback, because it's that sharpness. It's not so much fitness. How different are those two things in terms of finding that sharpness, despite the fact that your cardiovascular fitness is probably still at sky-high levels?
Yeah, and what it is it's more about picking up the flight of the ball, because you do all the work you want to do, and you can do all that, but you never can replicate it in terms of how quickly things are happening around you, the traffic, people running off your shoulder, decision makings, and just being able to look at the run but be able to pick up the flight of the ball perfectly. All those type of things, when you effectively come back for pre-season in terms of your heading, take ages to get back, really, because your timing's all off. When you're going for heading, ends up hitting you in the eye, your timing's not quite there. And I think certainly, I always remember that, I know the kind of role of a centre-half and the physique of a centre-half has certainly changed over the years. They're not as big and robust as they used to be. They're more mobile. But John is a big guy, and I just felt at times that Davis was leaning into him, wasn't getting his timing quite right. But in terms of how quick John gets things right, I've no doubt he'll be back to his usual high standard. But having said that, another clean sheet. So impressive, Sheffield tonight. They really are. And I think they will look at that 2 points that I think if they'd have got that goal, they'd have comfortably gone on to win the game.
For sure. And good to see Conor Hourihane as well getting the start as well for Aston Villa in that midfield. Just a quick one ahead of the weekend, Gary. It was due to be the weekend that Liverpool were going to win the Premier League. Not going to happen. To be honest with you, after watching that last night, I don't know why people even considered that Goodison Park was going to be where Liverpool were going to win the league, if you were depending on Arsenal to do them a favour against Manchester City. But Spurs against Manchester United tomorrow night, after watching the fitness and the standard of last night, I think it is going to live up to the hype, these next few games, and these big games in particular. Manchester United, we often talk about them too much, but it genuinely feels that they are one of the more fascinating teams in the Premier League at the moment, given how good their form was before the break, given they possibly have Marcus Rashford and Paul Pogba back in the team. It's a tricky one to figure out, given how good they were before the break. Do you automatically bring a star like Paul Pogba into the starting 11, for example?
Oh yeah, I think it's a completely new ball game now. It's a restart. I think that momentum that you had going into that's done and dusted. Forget about that. You've got to build it again. But I think it's exciting for United in terms of everyone coming back from injuries. Likewise, Tottenham, they'll have Kane back, Son's there, Bergwijn as well. So I think United and Spurs have benefited in terms of the players coming back. And I think if you look at United now, and under Solskjaer, I was always a bit, I never really bought into it. I always felt that it was just something, he got the job on the back of his career, his playing career. But certainly in terms of being backed now, there really does look like some positive signs there for Manchester United. You think about the quality that they have now going forward. Obviously, the midfield has added massive quality with the signing, Pogba coming back. I think United will be strong. I genuinely do. But likewise, I think Mourinho would have taken this opportunity because they looked like they were dead on their feet going just before the lockdown. It looked like everything was going wrong for Tottenham. So it's just give Mourinho an opportunity to regroup, get some key players back. So I genuinely think that's going to be that game will live up to its billing.
Do you think this break will have reinvigorated Jose Mourinho? He often needs a bit of a pre-season to organise things, and that's basically what this was.
Yeah, I think that's something you can say to all the managers, to be perfectly honest, Owen, because if you think about even Aston Villa, and I've been down the bottom where you're struggling and you're just looking for something just to go on a little bit of a run. And I think to break what was happening to them, that they were just losing and conceding so many goals, just gave him an opportunity to step back and say at Aston Villa, well, listen, why are we doing that? To regroup, reassess, because of course, when you're in the mix of it, you don't get that time. You genuinely don't. The games come thick and fast. But that gave them an opportunity to do that. I think they'll take the positives out of a clean sheet, Villa. But certainly Mourinho and all the other managers were able to take stock. We talked about Arteta. I think he'll look back now in the time that he'll have had to himself, where he can say, well, listen, I've been able to see all these players now firsthand, who is going to come on this journey with me. And I think he's made his decisions. I think a lot of managers will. I think that's the only bonus of this long lockdown, is that a lot of those managers were able to recharge themselves, not just their players, and just to go again for this last part.
Gary, it was also a hugely significant night on the protest front with the taking a knee before a game, a hugely striking image given everything we've seen in world sport over the last 4 or 5 years. Afterwards, you were listening to Brian Kerr chatting with Nathan, and this has been something that we've delved into quite a bit over the last couple of weeks on the show about how people in Irish football have experienced racism. And obviously Brian Kerr, as manager of the Ireland team, he's spoken about it in the past, but I'd completely forgotten about this, the fact that he, as Republic of Ireland manager, was receiving racist letters from anonymous people complaining about the fact that black people were representing Ireland. This would have been at the tail end of your international career, Gary. I'm not sure if you recall this happening or how Brian Kerr and his attitudes towards racism kind of affected the team in a positive way at the time.
Well, no, I always enjoy listening to Brian there, and it was a great interview as such. But in terms of looking back, I think Brian would like he would have done with all his players, would have tried to protect anyone who was being attacked as such. So whether or not he spoke personally to them, but there was never any sense of that. You would hope that the players, if they were experiencing it, that they would be able to comfortably say it to us, because this is something that I've been quite. I really enjoyed the debate. I've got friends I grew up with. Let's not forget that I grew up in Camden Town, which is a massive Irish community, but it's so cosmopolitan on top of that. There's so many different nationalities. So I had a very Irish upbringing as such, but a lot of my friends are from all different cultures and stuff like that. And effectively, racism is about power, in my mind. And what Brian is saying there, and I agree with him there in terms of why wasn't the generation before doing what the likes of Rashford and Sterling are doing now. And I don't know either of them, but I'm so proud of them, which is, I know it's not a condescending thing to say, but when they've done what they've done over the last couple of months, weeks, whatever, it just makes you feel so proud. But I think ultimately the reason they're able to do that now is that the normal mainstream in terms of how you would talk would be through the TV or give interviews to reporters, and effectively they can interpret that however they want. Now they can bypass all that with social media. I mean, I'm not on social media, but I see the power of it, and they can give out their thoughts process and that. And that's why when I look at the likes of Sterling, in terms of taking on the British press, which he did, it was an incredible thing to do. It was such I was so in awe of him at the time, because I've heard and since heard that the likes of Sol Campbell will say of my generation, I know Sol kind of well, reasonably well, so such, and saying, well, the reason I'm not getting these jobs is because of the colour of my skin. That's why Frank Lampard is getting them. But it's not. Well, I don't know. But why didn't you say it at the time? And I heard a great interview from Terry Connor, Mick McCarthy's assistant, who was saying it's brilliant now that these black lads are able to climb on our shoulders, on our backs of what we've done. And I thought that was so poignant, because I'm not dismissing that they were fighting the cause, but if no one's listening, how hard is it then to fight? Now people are listening, because the usual way has been bypassed through the papers, through the media. It's a different media now, isn't it? And these players now have a platform to do that, and it's great. I'm fully in support of them. I think it's credible what they're doing, and that was a powerful moment when all the lads took the knee before the game. That will reverberate around the world, and I think we're in changing times. Finally.
Yeah, it's interesting, and even in the context of Marcus Rashford and his personal cause over the last few days as well, perhaps there has been a shift in power. That's the point you're making about the media and the filter on Sterling, that the power is perhaps more in the players' hands.
Yeah, it is. It really is now, and it's amazing what they can potentially do. I mean, Marcus Rashford's. I mean, that is amazing what he's done. I mean, for a government to allow children to go hungry is staggering. It really is, when you just look at it in that context, that the government had to listen to a 22-year-old footballer. Now, listen, we hear a lot about these Premier footballers and footballers in general is that they're just party boys, blah, blah, blah. But the vast majority of them are great lads, and certainly those two lads who had mentioned, Sterling, Rashford, have done that. I mean, to do that is incredible, but as incredible it is, it's embarrassing that the government would allow children to go hungry the way they did.
Yeah, it's been quite a week, and it'll be interesting to see how the protests continue over the next little while. Just kind of on one final point then, I mean, Brian Kerr touching on the fact that racism was clearly a big thing from the Irish supporters towards the players.
Yeah.
Even in terms of any of your black teammates in the Irish dressing room, was that ever anything that they'd spoken about or anything that you had experienced firsthand?
I'm sure we went to countries, Eastern European countries. I'm not tarring them all with the same brush, but that you would have had the kind of racist chants on this, and that was, how long ago was that? 15, 20 years ago. They're still doing it. And the authorities are not really like punishing them for them, are they? Like playing behind closed doors and stuff. Ultimately, it is education. It's right what Brian said there. You're not born a racist. You're a product of your environment in terms of who's teaching you what as such. But it's amazing, isn't it? Because was any Irish supporter like writing letters about Paul McGrath, our most iconic player? I mean, he's idolised, isn't he? I'm sure there are some complete racist idiots who probably did, but I don't know whether or not it was just aimed at Clinton and Stephen Reid, as was mentioned. Obviously, when I first got into the Ireland squad, Curtis Fleming, and Curtis spoke so eloquently about his experiences. And I think it's only when you hear just how much it hurt those players that you do look within and to think like, my God, it's just, it's shocking. It's just absolutely shocking.
Listen, Gary, good chatting to you this morning. Thanks a million for taking the call.
Thanks, guys. Good luck.
Cheers, Gary. Gary's back on Monday morning if you're looking for more football analysis after the weekend's Premier League. Football is back, as you're probably aware, and on Friday night it's Norwich versus Southampton at 6 o'clock, and then Spurs versus Manchester United, the big one, at 8:15. Just a reminder that Now TV have all of the sports channels you need in 2 separate packs. You can watch Sky Sports on the Now TV Sky Sports Pass, and you can watch BT Sport and Premier Sports on the Sports Extra Pass. Passes are available as a day, week or month pass option, and it allows you to stream live sports like Premier League, Serie A, PGA Tour Golf, Formula 1 and many more. Search Now TV Sports to find out more. It feels like a bumper-ish weekend of sport, Will, given the volume of Premier League games. What's going to tickle your fancy over the next little while?
Do you know what's going to catch me slightly on Friday, Eoin, is that you've got a pretty interesting game in the La Liga title race, which is on pretty much at the same time as Spurs against Manchester United. So Spurs United is huge in terms of the race to get into the Champions League for next year. So I think that's probably going to be my primary focus. That'll be on the TV. I might well get the iPad out and watch Sevilla against Barcelona, which kicks off at 9 o'clock Irish time on Friday night too. Barca are currently a couple of points ahead of Real Madrid. Madrid have got a difficult game away to Real Sociedad on Sunday, which might be worth watching, the Battle of the Reals. But we'll have to see if Barcelona can extend their lead back out to 5 points against a very difficult opponent in Sevilla. It's one of their most difficult games that's left in the season. So that's on Friday too. And if your family members or loved ones can put up with you having 2 TVs on, or a TV and an iPad on in the living room, I suggest probably keeping an eye on both games. But I can't overstate how important Spurs against Manchester United is. It's almost one of those kind of perfect matches to kick us back into the first weekend of the restart.
Yeah, well, it's good to have it back. Time for the sports pages.
OTB AM.
OTBsports.com is where we're starting. Those Brian Kerr comments are our top story. Maybe I should have spoken out, he said, as he examines his conscience. We've got Royal Ascot tips for Gold Cup Day. That is up today. We've got Thom Malone with us on the show to give us his tips very shortly indeed. Stradivarius, the favourite for the Gold Cup at the moment. Niall Quinn hasn't been to many League of Ireland games. Brian Kerr on the FAI League of Ireland dispute at the moment, and the OTB brief is live every single morning. This morning it is about Premier League, taking a knee, Luiz, flops, Hawkeye drama and League of Ireland talks.
Irish Independent then, Eoin. One of the main stories inside the paper today is a continuation on the FAI story, which we've been talking about all week really, and it's an increased amount of money from the FAI, albeit it is dependent on them getting the money from the government, Sport Ireland or FIFA. So this story by Dan McDonnell, it first appeared online last night, but it's inside the Irish Independent Sports section today. Last week, Premier Division clubs in the League of Ireland were being offered a financial package somewhere between €95,000 and €160,000. That's now likely to be increased to €190,000. You might wonder, why is that extra money available? Well, they've scrapped the idea, which they did have over a month ago, where the rest of the Premier Division division season could have been played at 5 neutral venues. I believe at the time they were considering both Thomond Park and Athlone Town Stadium to be one of those, or to be 2 of those venues, and the rest to be in Dublin. But it looks like the fixtures will now take place at the home grounds for the League of Ireland clubs. So this frees up a bit of extra money in that there wouldn't be the rent being paid to those 2 venues, and that potentially the extra money which has been saved could be used for the League of Ireland clubs to bring their stadia up to the regulations required for COVID-19. It looks like streaming is very much on the back burner too, which would have cost the FAI money. It looks like that proposed plan won't happen, and testing may well go by the wayside too. I know it's been crucial with the 4 European teams in trying to have the return to football, but it looks like testing is not going to be as rigorous or as expensive as first expected. But that money coming in from the FAI, which would be in excess of €3 million, is dependent on them actually finding the compensation. And the other battle that Owens and Quinn are having to fight at the moment is now potentially from schoolboy football. The biggest league in the country, the DDSL, have made their decision. They put out a statement yesterday evening that they're going to switch their under 11 leagues to 9 against 9, and under 12 will be 11 against 11. This goes hugely against what Ruth Doctor had put in place a couple of years ago, and the leagues had to take on across the country, which is that you'd have 7x7 at under 11 level and 9x9 at under 12. And the idea was to create some more space for these players to play on the pitch. So this is almost like an open disregard of what Ruth Doctor had put in. And now that the DDSL have adopted this, it's going to be interesting over the next few weeks while the new underage leagues are being created. Are other leagues going to follow suit? And if they do, they're going against the FAI model, which was meant to be across the board.
Yeah, very interesting development there this morning. It's almost like the FAI now have battles on 2 fronts. They have the League of Ireland situation, which obviously is extremely severe. The only summer league in the continent that isn't back up and running yet or doesn't have a start date. And then on the other front, you've got the schoolboy leagues reneging on certain directives from Ruth Doctor. So again, it's probably the most interesting story in Irish sport at the moment. It's constantly developing every single day. The Irish Examiner leads with match report from last night at the Etihad. City back with a bang on night of woe for Arsenal, beating them 3-0. Hawkeye late to the restart party, meanwhile, while Gunners' failings remain constant in changed world. And then also match report from Aston Villa against Sheffield United. Blades frustrated amid goal line technology controversy is the headline there.
Well, the Times Ireland edition this morning, Owen, going heavily on the first 2 games in the Premier League coming back. Matt Dickinson's article on the back page about the drama that we saw in the 2 games. First of all, the goal line technology issue there was that we've spoken about in Sheffield United against Aston Villa at Villa Park, and also the 3-goal drubbing that Man City handed out to Arsenal. Their headline today is drama that only football can deliver. And on their back page as well is a massive crossword if you want to play that.
Front of the Irish Times sports section, Imperious De Bruyne pulls strings as City restart with show of force. That goes the headline in Jamie Jackson's match report. Only blot on display was a nasty injury laid on to Eric Garcia, who was stretchered off. Mary Hannigan's TV view, meanwhile, football seems to have spent 100-day hiatus growing up, and United denied by goal line technology. That is Sheffield United, of course, as they drew 0-0 at Villa Park. That is the Irish Times.
I do like the sub-editor work in the Mirror today. Over the line, Nyland was almost in the Holt end, is what they've gone with the picture of Hawkeye. They've used the TV footage for the picture, as opposed to what the Hawkeye officials couldn't see with the occlusion of the defender and goalkeeper blocking their cameras where they couldn't see if it was over the line. Very clearly, you can see the Aston Villa goalkeeper is about a yard back over the line trying to hold that ball from going over. And their headline for Man City against Arsenal is off to a flyer. Sterling, KDB and Foden on target in a City stroll with a little help from a Luiz red card nightmare. They're also touching on the tournament which is going to take place for the Champions League now after the remaining games are completed in the round of 16. Man City still have to navigate their game against Real Madrid if they're to qualify for the last 8, but they'll be played almost like a festival of football, like a blitz in Lisbon, and the Europa League is going to be concluded in Germany. Also an impact on the fixtures for the League of Ireland teams who are playing in Europe. They're going to be single leg qualifiers that they'll play from late August and September, and they're all covered in the Mirror. We also have our dates. It's going to be Thursday the 8th of October when Ireland play their game against Slovakia, and that's going to be a crucial qualifier for Euro 2021.
The Irish Daily Star, meanwhile, goes with hoorah, Sterling's flying restart, but real shocker for Luiz. What a balls up is their headline, which is fairly fitting really, on the Sheffield United ghost goal. No slow start for Stephen. Stephen Kenny says it's full steam ahead for Ireland's Euro 2020 plans. As you mentioned there already, UEFA confirming the playoff semi-final against Slovakia will take place on Thursday, October 8th. and fans could be present for finals. Manchester City fans could yet see their club lift a Champions League trophy. So this is Alexander Seferin, who was out yesterday saying that they're looking into the possibility of having fans in grounds. Wembley, for example, is going to be possibly one of the test grounds where they will try and implement social distancing while allowing fans to come in and watch their football team play.
Back of the Irish Daily Mail today, Sterling Silver, the obvious headline which they've gone with Raheem Sterling's goal in that 3-0 win for Man City. Scoreless draw between Aston Villa and Sheffield United. But something quite different on the back of the Irish Daily Mail today as well is something that we're still waiting for some clarity around, and that's what will happen if there's a positive test for a player in GAA. And Michael Clifford has got a piece on the back of the paper today. He says GAA teams will not have to go into collective quarantine in the event of an individual member testing positive for COVID-19. This is all part of Project Throw-In, which is likely to receive a boost, he says, in the coming days, when the government is expected to advise the players who come into contact with someone who's infected with COVID-19, whether that be a teammate or a mentor, they will be deemed as casual contacts. So a casual contact would require to monitor themselves for symptoms over a 14-day period, but they wouldn't have to self-isolate. So we're still waiting to see what's going to happen with a lot of these rulings on. And I know a lot of kind of clubs around the country, because they're going to be the guinea pigs in many ways when the club championships get back underway in the last week of July into the first week of August. What happens if a player was to test positive, and say maybe if a cluster of players were to test positive, and we're still waiting to see what's going to happen. Would games then be cancelled? Could teams be knocked out of competitions? So we're still waiting for the detail on that, but that's interesting that they would only be considered a casual contact and that the entire team wouldn't have to go into quarantine if one player was to test positive.
A cluster is such a haunting word at this point, isn't it? That if there was a cluster of GAA players who tested positive, that's not only that doesn't only have big implications for the GAA getting back up and running and the club championships getting back up and running. It's got big implications for the country as a whole, that if there were to be a cluster discovered, it would be bad news indeed. But you're looking at the signs from abroad and from the professional leagues at least, and even from the League of Ireland testing. Things look positive, and you're very much touching wood, as you say that, at the moment in terms of getting these things up and running. So hopefully, I like the way Project Throw-In is the name they've gone for as well. Can you restart a league post-COVID-19 without calling it Project something? Project Throw-In, as good a name as I would have come up with anyway. Back page of the Irish Sun is Govidiots. Wilder Fury, very good, as Tech Gaff hits Prem's return. That is excellent punnery from the back of the Sun this morning. Stirrer winner, David a loser, Manchester City 3, Arsenal 0. I can plan. Ireland boss Stephen Kenny says it is now full steam ahead in its preparations after a slow start. And Project Knee Start is their punny headline on the Black Lives Matter protest. That is the back of the Irish Sun.
Yeah, the Guardian today on back with a blunder. The ghost goal technology farce ruins the restart for the Blades. Sheffield United denied what would have been a win, and a great picture of Michael Oliver being questioned and pointing down at his watch, which should have been signalling that goal went in between Aston Villa and Sheffield United. Interesting story in the top left of the paper today too, which is that potentially might be a US bid which could challenge the expected Saudi takeover of Newcastle United. It looks like their decade-long period with Mike Ashley is heading towards an end, but apparently a US-based consortium, which is headed up by a TV chief, have now put in a bid of £350 million, which was the asking price that Mike Ashley had for the club. And maybe there might be an opportunity for Newcastle not to sell to those Saudi investors who are looking to come in from the royal family. I think the Premier League would probably be happy if that was to happen, because they've been trying to take him to court over TV rights. We'll see what happens with this story, but it looks like there's another twist in the Newcastle story on.
The Daily Telegraph leads with a photograph of Raheem Sterling celebrating his goal against Arsenal last night. The main story here then is Hawkeye sorry for goal blunder. The occlusion. The damn occlusion, Will. That is what did Sheffield United in last night. So that is the Herald, or that is the Telegraph rather. You're on to the Herald next.
Yeah, I think occlusion is probably a term that we're going to use over and over again over the next while. It's amazing. I always kind of would have went with blocked, but if you can find a more difficult word to use, it's always useful from time to time to try and sound clever. But the Herald this morning, again, has got a big focus on the football from last night. Again, they've gone with Blades denied by costly mistake in terms of Aston Villa against Sheffield United. City stunned the Gunners is the main story. Stroll for Pep's men puts pool celebrations on hold. So Liverpool will now have to wait until their game against Crystal Palace to be crowned champions. They won't be able to win the title when they take on their rivals Everton at the weekend. They're also continuing with their Anthony Daly series, where he's been putting in a series of diaries about his time in charge of the Dublin Hurlers, and they're looking at the 2012 All-Ireland Senior Hurling Qualifier on that great summer that Dublin had, winning the Leinster Championship and getting a right run through the All-Ireland as well. And they've got an interview with Stephen Kenny, who says that he's happy with clarity on playoffs. So he knows what's happening now for his first 3 games in charge, 2 friendlies to be played in September, and then that crucial game against Slovakia, which will come round very quickly indeed in about 5 months' time.
If you Google occlusion, there's a lot of dentistry terms, Will. The position of the teeth when the jaws are closed, that is what occlusion is. It's also a process in meteorology as well, so if there's any dentists or meteorologists joining us this morning, well, you will probably be pointing and laughing at us being so mystified by the phrase occlusion. Irish News is next up. This morning, they are leading with Graham. Don't put players into a club versus county spat. This is Mickey Graham, who's vowed that he won't call on his players until after the Cavan Club Championship is finished, saying there is no need to put players into a club versus county row. If everybody had that same attitude, there would probably be a lot of disputes avoided over the next couple of months. Wilder then, I don't know whether to laugh or cry. That is Chris Wilder, of course, referring to the ghost goal that occurred last night.
Racing Post, understandably owned, still going very heavy on Royal Ascot, and it's Stradivarius, who I'm sure we'll be talking about with Thom Malone in the next few minutes, who is their big tip for today as he goes for a Gold Cup hat-trick at Ascot. We also see a picture of Lord North, who was maybe a bit of a surprise for John Gosden in the Prince of Wales Stakes yesterday afternoon, which was the big race on day 2. So again, they've gone very heavy on that. And on their back pages, again, they're going for a preview already of Spurs against Manchester United, already being seen as the big Premier League game of this weekend.
Right, let's finally have a look at the brand new OTB Sports app this morning. There's a great exclusive up there for you today. It's a 45-minute long interview with Brian O'Driscoll and Jamie Dornan, available right now, chatting about rubbing shoulders with the best of the best in the golf and the celebrity world. You can get it by downloading the OTB Sports app right now in the App Store or on the Google Play Store. You'll find it at the top of your personalised feed and also in the Best of OTB section. And as well as that, you've got all the latest sports news, OTB Sports Radio, where you can listen to OTB AM, the video section there, as you can see, and our OTB podcast network. So that is the OTB Sports app, available right now in the Google Play Store or on the App Store. Right, plenty coming up in the next hour here on OTB AM as we bring you Keith Wood's State of the Union. Racing is next, though, with Thom Malone. Back in a sec.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
OTB's Mount Rushmore. 32 counties. One county representative choosing their sporting Mount Rushmore.
I'm going to be very unpopular. Thank God we can't go too far. I might have to go back into lockdown.
The bad news is they're all from Waterford.
Join the debate across all our social channels at Off the Ball.
You just need to put a health warning with it.
And catch the live decision making over the next few months on OTB AM, live every weekday at 7:30 AM on OTB Sports Radio.
Missing this? When that didn't materialise, I think both Paulie and myself probably looked at each other and kind of thought, what next?
And get this, the all-new OTB Sports app. Off the Ball, Ireland's premier sports channel, now has a new home, featuring the biggest names in Irish and world sports. Podcasts, interviews, news, commentary, analysis, plus almost 20 years of sporting archives. All free and ready when you are, at home or on the go. The new OTB Sports app. Download it now from the App Store and Google Play.
OTB AM.
You're welcome back. Just to tell you, this Friday at 12 o'clock, we'll be giving you another chance to win €1,000 in our new game show, Know Your Football. The prize fund has been reset after we had our first winner in last week's game, who walked away with a handy €2,000 after answering all 15 questions correctly. You can register at the following link. It is quiz.otbsports.com. That's quiz.otbsports.com. Then simply log in just before midday on Friday to play along. Know Your Football is brought to you in association with Paddy Power. Check out paddypower.com for their great offers and always gamble responsibly. Thom Malone, how are things?
That was a neat segue, wasn't it? Always gamble responsibly to Royal Ascot. Yeah, I'm good. Hopefully no dogs fighting today.
Hopefully not, but you've very much upgraded to your Thursday wardrobe. So what was the thinking behind today's tie and suit combo?
Well, you know, we're just trying to keep it fresh out. I'm still actually technically on the hunt for a top hat, so we're a little bit of pressure to make sure I have that for tomorrow. But yeah, Liberty tie, little pocket square there, and this is a jacket I've had for a while. Nice summer attire for the summer racing. I saw John Gosden yesterday at Royal Ascot in his casual hat. Looked very strange to see him with no top hat.
Right.
Thom, what's the blue ribbon behind you there?
Huh?
The dogs appearing.
Actually, Will, you like that because that was the second place at Tullamore Show. Look, there's Chip. He's here to say hello and everything. He's the one who won the wrestling match yesterday. But the ribbon behind is actually a horse finished second in Tullamore Show a couple of years ago. So that was the rosette for that.
Right. Well, congratulations belatedly on that Tullamore Show win. How have you been getting on tips-wise this week? Thom, you've been with us for the last 2 mornings. Has it gone as expected so far?
Yeah, well, look, as you mentioned, it was always going to be tough with so little form to go on. Really happy with Russian Emperor yesterday for Aidan O'Brien, who put in a really nice performance in the Hampton Court Stakes, and he looks like a potential live runner for the Derby now after a really strong staying performance yesterday. I mean, Lord North, I couldn't really have him, but what a performance by him to get the better of Adib, who he tipped up as well. So we got a good few seconds this week, unfortunately. But Lord North, really, really impressive. World is his oyster. Another brilliant John Gosden training performance. And if we look through the card today, John Gosden could have another brilliant day. But intriguing to see what Lord North does next. Because he's gelded, he doesn't have the same pressures as a potential stallion. So, he could race as often as he liked, and so there's no need to kind of worry about any sort of future commercial issues with him in the future if he gets beaten. But really, really impressive performance by him.
Today is all about one horse, Thom. It's about Stradivarius. Talk to us about Stradivarius and why he's a household name in racing. Yeah, well,
Yates is the foremost sort of stayer of kind of our generation. He won 4 Gold Cups between 2006 and 2009, trained by Aidan O'Brien. Phenomenal horse. Stradivarius is looking to almost run in his hoof prints today by picking up a 3rd Gold Cup at Ascot. There's kind of no real reason to oppose him, just looking through the rest of the cards, the likes of Technician and Moonlight Spirit are younger horses coming up, but Cross Count is thoroughly exposed. He's been beaten by Stradivarius the last 2 times they've met. The good thing about Stradivarius, and you'd always want this from a stayer, is that he's had a prep run. Now, he did get beaten last time out, but that was over an inadequate trip. I really wouldn't worry about that. The other slight concern is that there will have been too much rain. But look, the going is good to soft with a little bit of rain forecast. But the way the ground is ridden has tended to be slightly quicker than what they've said. And like I said, the perhaps lack of quality in the field against him is a slight, should kind of compensate for the rain softened going. And like I said, he had that run 13 days ago as well. Yes, it was over an inadequate trip, but you just really like to see a horse get out. You won't have had a hard race because he only went over 10 furlongs rather than this is nearly 2.5 miles. So look, Stradivarius is an absolute superstar. So few flat horses stay in training, particularly in Entar, until they're 6 years old. You'd have to thank Bjorn Nielsen and say, like, this was a wonderful stallion prospect, just what he's achieved on the track already, and so to even keep him in training is a big risk on their part. But look, he's an odds-on favourite. He's deservedly an odds-on favourite. To be perfectly honest, I cannot see him. I can't see him getting beaten, to be honest. Maybe Moonlight Spirit could be one to finish second. He's only 4. But another strange aspect to this is Aidan O'Brien doesn't have a runner in it. And you think about Ballydoyle and Coolmore and how much they, contribute to the staying programme. And they've won the race, 7 times, and a couple of short head defeats as well in the last sort of 15 years. And they don't have a runner. So that's kind of another strange aspect to this race. But look, on all known form, this is Stradivarius' race to lose.
Right, okay. Well, it's going to be good watching anyway, especially if he's such a heavy favourite, just to see him. So you're basically saying that the last 2 defeats for Stradivarius, don't worry about them too much. The field is suitably weak to allow him to be very worthy of his favourite tag.
Yeah, the one at the back end of last season, he just kind of got stuck in the mud a little bit. And then his defeat last time out, everything was against him. It was literally a warm-up run just because of the way the season's been compacted. He's just not. He wasn't able to. There was no opportunity to have a prep run over an adequate trip, so they just ran him over a mile and a half.
Thom, we have 2 minutes. Do you want to run us down through the rest of the tips for today? Do you want to start with your strongest tips?
Well, we'll just go from the top.
Okay.
In the first race of the day is the Golden Gate Handicap. It's a new race. There's a horse called Acquitted in this who ran into an absolute superstar last night, and the last time out rather, who I actually fancy later on the week, called Palace Pier. But this guy Acquitted didn't get badly handicapped because of finishing second to him, so he has a chance in the opening race. The Wolferton then, this is the Wolferton at 150 is for horses who kind of last year you're probably thinking, oh, maybe these guys are Derby horses or the like. So Dubai Warrior, also trained by John Gosden, he's one who looks like he could still be improving. I'd say the horse I'm most interested in today is in the Jersey Stakes at 225. He's called King Leonidas. He's unbeaten so far. He's impeccably bred. He's by Kingman, so he'll be able to handle the ground. He costs 750 grand as a yearling. He looks absolutely all there. He's on the improve. He's trained by John Gosden. He'd be one of my bets of the day. Okay. The Chesham is impossible at 3 o'clock. Wouldn't get too concerned about that, but Battleground is very interesting for Aidan O'Brien, the first son of ARC winner Found, who steps up in trip, has a similar profile to Churchill, who won the race previously. And at bigger prices later on in the last couple of races, look, the Britannia and the Sandringham to close out are bloody impossible. So a couple of big prices. Dubai Mirage will be ridden by Kieran Fallon. That's young Kieran Fallon, son of the former champion jockey. And also Onassis will be ridden by Hayley Turner, who's about a 25-1 shot in the last. Really nice pedigree. Again, you kind of have to guess a little bit. You're going back on form that's 6-7 months old just because we haven't had a season. But Dubai Mirage and Onassis, just two that perhaps at prices could get us out. But look, today is all about Stradivarius, and hopefully he gets a third gold cup.
Brilliant stuff, Thom. Chat to you tomorrow morning. Enjoy the racing.
Thanks, lads.
It is 9:10 on this Thursday morning, and it is time to get into the latest episode of Keith Wood's State of the Union. So we've got former England player Maggie Alphonsie, Scrum Queens founder Ali Donnelly, and Wendy Keenan, and the chair of Munster Women's Committee are joining Keith. So that's up next.
OTB's State of the Union with Keith Wood.
All right, you're welcome along to the latest episode of Keith Wood's State of the Union. Keith is here as always, and I'm Nathan Murphy, sitting in for Ger Gilroy this week. We have a brilliant panel today. It is always a privilege to have a World Cup winner on the show, and Maggie Alphonsie is just that. Successful at England back in 2014. Maggie's now a member of the RFU Council. Ali Donnelly is the founder of the hugely popular Scrum Queens and is also communications director at Sport England. And Wendy Keenan, who has many roles within Irish rugby, including being chair of the Munster Women's Committee and also sitting on the IRFU's Women's Committee. So, Keith, the future of the women's game, the focus of today's episodes, and I guess while we are now very much entering the harsh economic impact of COVID-19, the one overarching theme of the series so far is that while COVID-19 is going to have huge ramifications for the sport of rugby, most of the issues that you've been discussing and that we want to discuss, they were there even before the crisis started.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. There have been many issues, and we have taken the opportunity over the last few weeks in lockdown to pause and reflect and look for the differing opinions and also information on the State of the Union, on the game that we all love. We don't have all the answers. In fact, we've been looking for the right questions in relation to rugby. And the main governing question we have is, if there is now a reset, what would we do differently if we had our time back again? So, Maggie, I might ask you first, actually. What was the State of the Union in the women's game before this crisis?
So, I guess pre-COVID, I would like to say that the women's game, I thought, was growing, but there were still concerns around the women's game developing and growing globally. So, in places like, I can only really talk for England, I guess. In England, it was pretty strong, as you can see with the Tyrrell's Prem 15. Having a set of strong teams competing out on a regular basis, the scores being relatively close, but developing a very strong national side, and the England team, winning quite a lot of their international games. So from the English perspective, you'd say the game was pretty strong going into COVID. Coming out of COVID, I'd almost say I'm a little bit uncertain by what's coming ahead, especially when I look at the, I guess, top flight game with regards to the Premiership. You know, we have no sponsor at the moment. They're ending their sponsorship at the end of their 3-year contract, so it's Tyrrell's. And you need big sponsors, I personally feel, to ensure that you're growing the game, but also pushing the reach of it in terms of its visibility. So that's still waiting to be confirmed. And once we get a big sponsor, then I think I'll be a little bit comfortable in that sense. But at the same time, I think COVID has affected all women's sports, and we've become pretty much a afterthought. And I think that's been my concern. You know, when is the women's game going to start again? It's pretty much thrown into the community game anyway. So when is it all going to start again? And when it does, we need to have certainty behind sponsors, and you know that we're going to still have the same support that we had prior to the COVID.
And even if we're to look back on it as what it was like before COVID, was it sustainable on its own? Was women's rugby sustainable on its own?
I mean, it'd be great to get everyone else's perspective on this one, so I can only talk from my own perspective. I don't think it's sustainable on its own, no. I think it really needs the help of, you know, collaborating with men's sides in particular. So one of the things that Tyrrell Prem 15 did quite well was that you're starting to see the support from the men's, I guess, program. So, for example, if I look at Saracens, you know, I know there's been a lot of controversy there, but there's been support from their side to help the women's program. We've recently heard about Exeter, you know, they're joining the Premier 15's league next season. Same with Sale as well. So, you know, that's massive. So it's not a standalone thing. We definitely need support with the aim that one day we will be standalone. But I have to say the collaboration is what's key for our sport to grow.
Okay, and Wendy in particular, what could you give me an idea of the structure within Ireland?
Okay, so our landscape is a little bit different, Keith, in relation to you know, the effect of COVID has. But if we look at the structures within, I suppose each of the provinces has their women's committee, which feeds into your rugby committee, and you know, usually the chairs would sit on the branch committees as well. The chairs and the youth representative then would also sit on the IRFU women's subcommittee. And we would meet quite regularly and feedback there. And our Women in Action plan provides a platform, I suppose, for us to have a structured format for reporting back in terms of statistics in relation to that. And then Mary Quinn, who is the chair of the IRFU Women's Subcommittee, is also co-opted onto the IRFU committee, and she would also sit on the rugby committee there. In terms of, I suppose, the effect that COVID will have on our club structure, we were already going through a restructure in relation to developing the game, and our AIL had been expanded to 10 teams, so there was the introduction of 2 new teams to start in the coming season. While of course it has had a huge financial effect on all teams, both boys, men's, and the girls and the women, you know, I hope that there's a lot of positives, and this has given time for clubs to reflect and to plan for the future. We've been doing a lot of work, you know, contacting teams, looking at our development squads, staying in touch with players, you know, on an online platform. And one thing that we have done, I suppose, from a Munster perspective, is formed a document, a club support document, so that it's almost like a health check for clubs, you know, where we want to integrate the girls and the women's rugby fully into the clubs, where that mightn't happen in all clubs. So it has given us time, I suppose, to do that and look at our practices and look at what best practice and start to introduce those.
Just in relation to both the UK and Ireland, if you were starting again, would you start where we are now, or would you do something different? I know there was a conversation in Ireland that maybe Ireland might go along a county system, almost like a more GA system than a club system, rather than copying exactly what happened in the men's game previously. What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's a place for both. I mean, it does happen in the GA. I know that there are people who support that viewpoint and people who are against it. From a Munster perspective, we're incorporating both for the coming season. We do have an issue with our adult playing numbers. I mean, that's where we have a huge drop-off rate. And while we're growing the numbers at underage levels, we are seeing a fall off, and that's an area that we have to tackle. So to create sustainable clubs and a pathway, I suppose, for clubs to have players going from the youth section all the way through to adult level, we are now forming, if you like, a county team. The example I would give is Kerry. So we have 4 clubs who have strong underage structures but struggle at the adult game, and for the coming season they're going to field like essentially a county team into the Munster League. It'll be a first for us, it'll be a first in Ireland. We'll support the clubs through there. We have the agreements in place in relation to the clubs. We're also doing it on an East Munster basis as well, and we're going to try it, we're going to see how it works, and we believe that if we support that structure that we might be able to replicate that in other places around the county. I mean, Munster has its own problems. We're logistically a very big province, so travel does become an issue. So, and there's a cost associated to travel. So it's hard to say whether we should go back and look at the county team. We have some very successful clubs. If you look at UL Bows, one of the best teams in the country, they're sustainable, in an entity on their own, so they wouldn't need that county structure. So there might be a place for both, which reflects what happens in the GAA.
And Ali, if I could ask you the same question, would you change things an awful lot if you were to start again?
Yeah, I mean, I think the point you're getting to here is about innovation, and can the women's game actually use this opportunity, i.e. this reset, for want of a better phrase, to try and do things differently. And it's a question I think that is starting to be asked a bit more as the women's game grows and develops across the unions that are investing into their women's programs. What is right for women's rugby, not what's right for rugby. And so, yeah, there are definitely things we could do differently. But I suppose the point I would make generally, just, reflecting on what Maggie and Wendy have said, the women's game, the momentum in the women's game was only going in one direction pre-February. And, it wasn't just COVID, by the way. The weather was also a really difficult factor for women's rugby in February. So most of the Six Nations, for example, got cancelled. Scotland, I think, played 2 matches, partly because of the weather, then COVID, and some of their players got it. So it was going in one direction. It got sort of chopped off at the knees because of a couple of different things. But that momentum there, I think, is something to be really optimistic about. But the question, what can women's rugby do differently as a result of this? Well, we should be thinking about, and we're going to have to now. So the World Cup qualifiers have been cancelled in September. So who knows when Ireland will get to play again. So World Rugby and all the organisations who are involved in the women's game do have now an opportunity to look at different structures and different formats. And I think most of them are doing it. I mean, the other challenge that we have in the game, and this is a challenge regardless of COVID, is that for so long, women's rugby has been sort of, chasing its tail in terms of the game. So, I was sort of looking up some research about why we were so far behind in terms of commercial investment. And I was reminded that in Ireland, right, this is an Irish podcast, so I'll use an Irish example. The first men's test game in Ireland was in 1875. First women's test game was in 91. And if I could do my maths properly, there's a 116-year difference there, right? So the women's game has been catching up for decades in terms of investment, commercial opportunity, etc. And it isn't, you asked Keith, is it sustainable on its own? No, it's not. Of course it's not. Partly because of that, but also the game of rugby isn't sustainable. I mean, look at the Premiership here. Most clubs are losing money hand over fist. So I think what we do have is a great product and a great opportunity to make it sustainable if it is sold correctly. And I guess we can get into the conversation about sponsorship and selling in later, but it's just a really interesting time to be involved in the women's game.
Well, I think we can go into that almost straight away because it's a perfect little link. But I often compare rugby from 1990, 91, 92 when I started. So when I started with AIL and when I started with the Ireland squad, when there was no payment for games, when there were no sponsors, when there was no rights being paid by television companies for it. And there's a huge similarity at that stage. So that's only 30 years ago. And in that period of time, it's gone and ramped in that direction. Is that growth potential there for the women's game? And if not, why not?
Yeah, why not? Anything is possible right now, I think, particularly because, not just women's rugby on its own, but there is a huge momentum around women's sport and participation in women's sport that is there to be sort of capitalised on. And I agree, there are definitely some overlaps of what was happening as the men's game went professional to what's happening in the women's game now. And we do need to learn some lessons from that, although times are different. So in the women's game, you've got real kind of, Maggie alluded to this earlier, some slightly worrying, variables. You've got a fully professional England team, a semi-pro France team, and everybody else is amateur in the 15s game. So that is creating some really challenging anomalies and gaps that are going to be very hard to close, I think. But you're right to make the link because we are at a similar stage, I think.
But I remember back, even my first year in Quins, we trained in the evening time, and we were professional. And it was very interesting because the coaches said, we have you now, we can train you 3-4 times a day, which you can't, of course. But also there was a huge pressure that kind of went to the guys who wanted to continue to work and to the guys who wanted to play fully. A lot of the guys, they would have earned less money and had less potential going forward if actually they'd gone professional. So is there a big urge, is there a big drive for the game to be across the board professional, either at an international level or at a club level?
I don't know if Maggie wants to come in because she will obviously have more kind of links to players, but some players don't want to go professional. In France, they decided to go semi-pro because the cap on what you can earn in the women's game is pretty low. The England women's players who are contracted are earning max 30k. Yes, they can add some money on top of that, but if you're a doctor or if you're an accountant or whatever, you're losing 50, 60 grand. So I think it's back to the point, what's right for the women's game?
Maggie, any thoughts?
Yeah, just coming back in on that, because I guess when I was playing, I remember at the time that from the outside, everyone wants the women's team to be professional, to be just like the men. And as a player, you think, yeah, I really want to be professional. And at the same time, the opportunities in terms of finance are so significant. You know, to go professional for us was going to be quite low in terms of how much money you're going to get, where I could quite happily get a job, you know, as head of development and make quite a large amount of money, including bonus. And that's quite a big decision for a player to make. And now that you're seeing in England in particular, the players have gone professional, I think a lot of the players are happy to be professional, of course, because it's something that we've strived for such a long time. And from the outside, the world is pushing it. The world wants the women's team or women's sport to be professional. If we were looking at the detail, though, if you think about the options that some of those players have had to make in terms of, do I pursue a career, as Ali's already highlighted, as a doctor or as a lawyer, where I can make large amount of money and also really establish my career? Or do I take the risk and hope that I play for my club and hope that I can really do well for England and hope that that career is long? It's such a big risk. So I think players have to be professional, but there's a real press that we need to make sure that the women who are professional are getting, and I'm not going to get exactly the same what the men get, but they need to be getting a lot higher in terms of how much money they get paid, and the benefits that they get paid have to be good as well to ensure that the balance equals out.
Go on, sorry, Nathan.
Sorry, I was just going to ask Ali, from your role within Sport England, you're probably seeing a lot of the data around participation figures in women's rugby, particularly at an underage level. And I'm wondering, that professional end point, is that an important factor in participation numbers, in keeping young girls involved in the game, that having that goal of, well, I can go on and while there are other options, I can make a career of this. This is something I can enjoy and make money out of into my 30s. Does that factor into participation numbers at all? Or do you expect it to?
What factors more is visibility. And so obviously if you are a professional, you have more visibility. And so visibility is really important, particularly for younger girls taking up sports. And you know, that's one of the concerns of today, actually. I was tweeting about this yesterday. We got the Premier League back today. And I looked at every single, because I'm up early. I have a 3-year-old who likes to get up pre 6 a.m. I was looking at the sports websites this morning, and you would be hard pressed to find a women's sports story there today, because we're not playing. No one is playing anything. So visibility is more of a push into more of a factor in participation. But on the growth point, I would just say, I make this point all the time, and I think it's really important. In the game of rugby, women and girls rugby in almost every nation, is particularly the Tier 1 nations that we know, traditionally called Tier 1 nations, is the only growth area. Adult male rugby is in decline in many of the major nations around the world. So strategically, that investment in sort of growing the game at grassroots level, whether it's visibility that helps to drive it, or it's genuinely money and time and strategy, it's really important for NGBs at the moment. So that's quite interesting. And that gives me a lot of hope, because you can't ignore the one growth area of your sport.
No, and that was one of the points, Ali, as well, I was going to touch on. And I think we had in one of our previous conversations, was whether you would want to have your own national governing body, or whether you want to be you are part of rugby, you want to stay part of rugby, you want to be the key driver for the growth of rugby.
Yeah, I mean, my view on that is that from a community and grassroots amateur side, yeah, of course, you need that's what NGBs are there for, right? They're there for everybody who plays rugby, whether you are someone with a disability, you are, female, male, young, old, whatever. I think where would get really interesting, we're not there yet, is when the competitions element becomes a real factor. So Maggie referenced the Premier 15s here. The same model happens for other sports. So when it comes to professional competitions and leagues, is the union the right place to drive the sponsorship and investment? Are they actually the experts, or is it another body driven by commercial revenue? So in the same way that Premiership Rugby run the competitions here for the men's game, but the RFU or the NGB, is that an interesting model? And that happens in other countries. So, the WNBA run the professional basketball league for women, but there is a body that run basketball for America. You know what I mean? So I don't think we want to go back to the days where there's a separate committee running the women's game. So I don't know, Wendy, if you were on it, but I was certainly on the IRRFU committee. When it was running the women's game, and you're just so hamstrung by infrastructure and resources. So no, I think all together to grow the grassroots and community game, but there's definitely a debate to be had about what happens at competition, when the competition is really generating interest.
Yeah. I think just to add to that, Ali, I mean, we worked hard for integration to come away from the IWRFU and to have full integration with the IRFU, and it, to give us the positive standing in relation to, the development of the game. So I would see them incorporated. I can't see us separating out, after developing those structures and securing funding, especially with our Women in Rugby Action Plan, which guarantees us, funding for the game, for the development of the game and the growth of the game. I suppose in Ireland we're in a very different position to other countries, and we can aspire to be professional, like France and England, but we're not there yet. You asked an important question there. Do you dream of being a professional rugby player? I'm sure if I spoke to a 14-year-old who has, is playing, very good rugby, her dream, I'm sure, would be to, play for her country and to get paid for it. But, success drives sponsorship too. And that's a key factor when you are looking for sponsorship. And unfortunately in Ireland, we're not there yet. So it's it's a different debate for us in relation to that.
And in terms of that integration that has happened over the last number of years, are you getting enough of a representation further up the track in the IRFU?
We do have representation, as I mentioned previously. We have our two co-optees onto the IRFU committee. We would hope in the future there would be more. And I firmly believe that whenever there's a discussion around women's rugby and there's decisions to be made, that we need to be at the table. And I'm not talking about gender representation. We need people at the table that know what's going on the ground, know what's going on at a grassroots level, and I suppose who have walked the walk in relation to women's rugby. I do believe that the RFU, their governance structure, is under review at the moment, and I think there might be a proposal in relation to the delegates coming from the branch, that one of those may be female in the future, so that would give us more representation. And sometimes we look at the top down rather than looking from the bottom up. So when we look at the people that are representative at the IRFU level, they have come from the clubs. They've been nominated by their clubs onto provincial committees, and from there they have made their way to the IRFU committee. So I suppose we need to work on our representation at club levels and have more women in the decision-making process and on committees at club level to bring those onto the provincial committees and therefore step up. The IRFU did introduce the leadership programme, which has been very successful, and we're due to start one specific for the women in rugby game in March. Unfortunately, COVID has put a halt to that, but we look forward to that next season, and that's about identifying people that will come to the game and sit on committees as appropriate.
Can I jump on the back of what Wendy said there? I think that's the biggest challenge about trying to get representation at the top end, so councils and board, is because I think our pipeline structure isn't very good, in the sense that, yes, we get people from our game at the very bottom, but the people who are coming in from the bottom in terms of our grassroots, the barriers are quite limited. So, you're not getting women in, you're not getting other diversity in. Instead, you're getting the same people on those committees at the lower end, at club level, and they're the ones who are making their way up to the top in terms of councils and boards. And that's where we need to change it. We need to widen almost that pipeline and find other access routes in, even if it needs to be a fast route, fast track route to get some women potentially into those roles.
Maggie, is it an issue that women administrators that come in at club level are only be considered for the women's game, and they're not being considered for the wider game. Is that the issue?
I think it's quite varied. So the landscape in England is, I've seen some fantastic, there's some female presence out there, which is brilliant in terms of club level. You know, Jill Burns is brilliant, what she does at Waterloo. So there's people who are finding roles that aren't just representing the women's game, but the general consensus, there are going to be women who have made it onto those roles, but they are only really there just looking after the girls and the women's section at the club. And that's a bit of a challenge because, again, they don't make their way through the pathway when you think about when opportunities come up at CB levels, so constituent body levels, where there's opportunities to progress further. No one picks them because no one sees them. So we just need to do a bit more and trying to, first, I think we need to appeal to more women, people of diversity, to say, look, there's some roles out there at your club that would really, you could make a big difference. And then once they're on those committees, then push them to go into CB levels and then, progress further. We just need to do more to sell it, because at the moment, I don't think a lot of players or volunteers know of their opportunities, and actually it doesn't really appeal to them at the moment.
We also have to call it out. I mean, Maggie, you and I talked this week about the RFU Council, and I know there's loads of work going on around kind of diversity in the game here, but what is it, 6 of 56 council members are women? I mean, that's just unacceptable. And also, World Rugby's Council, I refer to something I wrote. I said something about there are more Bretts than women on that council. I mean, that's just ridiculous. And so we have to keep calling this out, and we have to keep putting pressure on, the status quo. And back to the kind of what I was saying at the top about, how many decades we're catching up on. Sport structures and NGB structures, including all of those around governance, were set up, by men for men, because that's what was happening in the sports when they were established. So, part of the work we do at Sport England is looking, we've got a governance code here, and we put targets a few years ago around women, so 30% of sports boards need to be, to be female. And, that's a very blunt instrument, but it does work. And you get, you diversify the conversations happening around the table, and it doesn't necessarily need to be about women's rugby. As you said, Keith, it needs to be, the kind of perspective that women bring to an issue is different in many cases. And there's pressure on Sport England now, rightly, because of the Black Lives Matter conversation of recent weeks, to add a target to BME inclusion on board. So, absolutely, we got to change the structures and help people to find a way up the ladder that isn't there now. But we do need to use platforms like this. It's one of the reasons I wanted to come on here, just to, you got to keep banging the drum. And I'm sure people are sick of listening to me banging on about inequality in women's rugby, but without it, nothing changes.
Even if you look at some of the trailblazers that have been in the game, and Joy Neville in refereeing, the more visible she is, and the fact that she's reffing men's matches, and should be, because she's a bloody good ref. It's nothing to do with gender in that instance. It's just the fact that she's very, very good at her job. The more evidence that happens, the more likelihood it's going to happen again.
Yeah, and I think, what happens there is that I hate the word normalizing, but it starts to become common, and people stop talking about it, and it just becomes part of the fabric of the game. And I think there's a really interesting thing happening to how the public feel about women's involvement in sport and in rugby, which would be considered, very male kind of in its origins. People really love, they have a real deep connection with their women's teams, particularly, as Wendy talked about, the successful ones. I don't know if people saw the story this week around in Australia, where the national women's teams took out the top 4 spots in the survey that said that, the public had the strongest emotional connection with those teams, and women's sevens was 3rd. So there's a real kind of moment and sea change coming, I think, for women in sport, whether it's, on boards, in, playing, visibility and refereeing and so on. And, we're coming for it. So it's, things are about to change.
Maggie, you're one of the half dozen. Sorry, Wendy, I was just going to say to Maggie that you're one of the half dozen on that council then with the RFU. How did you go through that process from ending being a player, and so many players have strong thoughts on how the game should be run and probably fade away into the background? How did you manage to stay involved? Are there stepping stones there to help females who are coming out of the game to move into that level, or was it just sheer personal will to get yourself to the top?
So I guess when I came out of the game way back in 2015, which feels so long ago now, I'll be honest, there wasn't anything there really for players to find their way back into the game as a volunteer or any form of governance and so on. So I guess I came out of the game really, like most players do, just really wondering, what am I going to do? I still love the game so much. I really want to help the youth coming through. I really am passionate about diversity as well. But look, my initial focus was actually I need to pay the bills. So I guess I found a way into broadcasting, and I absolutely love it. And I guess to add on to a point that Ali's really highlighted, it was all about, for me, visibility. So I was very determined to do well in that area, especially being a woman. Didn't necessarily think about a woman of colour, but I just wanted to be somebody on there who could keep pushing, I guess, the women's game, or with female players. And then just by chance in 2015, obviously Jason Leonard was the president of the Rugby Football Union during the Men's Rugby World Cup, and he contacted me and just said there was an opportunity on the council to be a national member. Would you like to take that role on? So, for me at the time, I hadn't thought about wanting to be on the council. It didn't really necessarily appeal to me. I quite like the life of being in broadcasting, being on TV. But not until he sort of approached me about it and realised actually the impact that I could have, I didn't really actually appreciate that I could actually do this. So I was like, yeah, I'll definitely be up for taking on this role. And then when I got onto the council and I got to meet the other councils and council members, I really realised it was such a welcoming environment. But I also realised that I was finally in the room and I can have those challenging conversations and start banging the drum, really. As Ali's already highlighted, it was all about trying to push certain things forward. And I've been on the council now for about just over 3 years. I've still got a bit longer, but obviously the terms will, at some point, my council member term will come to an end. So I really want to make sure that I can go as far up the ladder as possible. And one of those goals is to hopefully one day be RFU president, really. And I just think we need lots of change. The council want to create change, and I want to be part of that process.
It's a great point, really important point there, Maggie, is that idea of co-opting. So if you're trying to make significant change and you have to put 20 years into the club and the province and everything to try and get there, change will come incredibly slowly. Whereas if you have people who are forthright and very capable, like we know each other for years, you're never shy about fighting your corner. You're going to be able to say your piece. There has to be an opportunity for that to happen, and it can't just be for the sake of having a couple of people co-opted on. But equally well, it can't be just having 30 years of service that gets you there, for the fact that you're the last one standing, that gets you into some of these council positions. So the co-opting area is essential for rugby to continue its change in compliance and governance.
I definitely think so, and it's an interesting topic, because actually you don't want to upset the people who are currently at the top, but at the same time you've got to create change, you've got to disrupt somehow, and actually co-opting is a really good way. And that we've seen with the World Rugby Council and how much of a change that's been since they've added a lot of women on that, and I think it's made such a big difference. I do think we need to think about how our other councils and other governing bodies also formed and what the structure is. And I know, obviously, Ali's already highlighted, Sport England are going to look to potentially revise the code of sport governance, because that might change things as well in terms of how a council and a board is formed.
Wendy, from the Irish point of view and having the voice in the room, it's been interesting looking at the back pages, and maybe it follows on from what Ali was saying, that it's the Premier League that dominates and there's very few women's stories today. But when we talk about IRFU cuts, and we were in contact with the IRFU, and they say obviously budgets are still very much under review as to how the women's game will be affected. But all the conversation around cuts has been dominated by the professional men's players. And they have a very strong voice in the room with Rugby Players Ireland, and that is going to be the focus for the next 3-4 months. The thought that they may have to take a 10 or 20% pay cut, and the longer term impacts on grassroots as to what may happen in the women's game. Do you feel in Irish rugby that voice is in the room when those decisions are going to be made?
I think it is, and I think it's up to us to make sure that our voices are in the room. We can't leave that, up to anybody else, that we have to keep knocking on the door and asking those questions. As a result of the 5-year strategic plan, it has led to funding to secure that we reach those targets, and it has led to an increase of development officers in the province. Here in Munster, doubled our staff that were developing the women's game. one would hope that that funding is ring-fenced, because if we were to regress back to the position we were in 12 months ago, then there's going to be a regression in the numbers. And if we don't grow the numbers at grassroots level, then you're not going to see that, develop onto, provincial teams, national teams, and lift the standards that are currently there, and the performances are there. So I think it's up to us to keep asking the questions in relation to all of those aspects in terms of funding, and to make sure that, the funding isn't cut. There are going to be cuts. It's going to be cuts across the board in relation to, all walks of life, everybody in employment. COVID is affecting the world, but we'll have to deal with it as best we can, and make sure that the cuts aren't made to the women's game, because it'll be a huge regression if they were.
Can I ask if there was one thing each one of you would like to see changed, what would it be?
God.
Ali, you go first then. Go on.
I don't know. I mean, I have 100. I think because I write about the global game, I think I really want to see progression in the kind of global calendar for the women's game. So we've got a really disjointed setup and system. We've got a quite, a Six Nations which isn't very well balanced, much less balanced than the men's Six Nations. Again, a tournament born out of an idea that this was a competition that was, run by men for men, and it isn't really working anymore. The window doesn't work. Arguably the teams don't work, and so I would really like us to be, and I know that World Rugby are doing this with national governing bodies and so on, just looking at a very different calendar for women's rugby at test level that gives people opportunities to play teams who are at the same level of them more often, but also brings up the rest, because there's just too much disparity now. I alluded to it earlier. I mean, England as a pro team, and they were already one of the best teams in the world. It's just very difficult to keep up with a team that's being paid to train professionally, and so I think that for me would be huge. And I know that World Rugby were close to announcing something, and then COVID hit. So I'm really interested to see where they've gotten to.
And Wendy?
It's a tough question. Like Ali, there's so many things that you want to change. I suppose if it was one, it would be representation on the different committees, both at provincial level and at an IRFU level, and to have more of a voice at those. I suppose that would be the one thing that I would like to change, that I'd like to see in the future. We mentioned about visibility there being very important, and it's key. We need our young girls and our young women to be able to see that there is a pathway for them, whether it is coaching, refereeing, but also representation at a higher level at the higher tables. And that would be the one change that I would like to see happen. And I suppose COVID has given a chance for reflection, and it has allowed time, for that planning process and for us to ask questions. And the one positive that I see is that we can attend meetings from our homes, which is a big plus in relation to not having to travel, which would be a big aspect. When you're asking people to sit on committees at a higher level, you're usually asking them to travel to Dublin. If you're working full time, then that's hard during the week. So I think that's a big plus that has come out of COVID, but that is the one change, I suppose, that I would like to see. I'd like to see more representation on the different committees.
And Maggie?
So I love both what Ali and Wendy have said. I mean, mine was very much around what Wendy's really highlighted about representation in influential positions, on councils, on boards. I think that's massive. I guess to pull out from that, the biggest bit is visibility. It's hearing those stories, it's sharing their concerns, it's addressing those challenges. So it's visibility of those who are on councils and boards or in roles of influence, but also making sure we keep making those players visible as well across globally. I think that's really important. And by that, I mean players who are obviously performing well, but also players who are doing broadcasting. And so just keep making them visible, because I think that's going to be quite key to inspire the next generation, but also to ensure that we stay in the limelight and ensure that conversations are being had and that want to involve us as well.
Yeah. Can I just add to that, I suppose, just to mention, because it is an important milestone, I suppose, in terms of rugby in Ireland, that like next year we'll have Anne Hennigan, who's going to be president of the Connacht branch. The following year we'll have Debbie Carty, she'll be president of the Leinster branch. I mean, if we had been having those conversations, 5-6 years ago, that we would have had female presidents of those, those branches, we'd be astonished. So there are two positive milestones that are happening, in the next year and the following year, and hopefully the other provinces will follow suit.
Oh yeah, there's been enormous progress. I mean, I started Scrum Queens in 2009, and where the game, I mean, firstly, I wouldn't have even imagined things like the Olympics happening, having women's sevens players there. Pro players, I didn't think that would happen in my lifetime. So, change can happen quickly if there's momentum behind it, as Wendy's pointed out. And I think the thing that is really interesting about right now is that there are huge opportunities. We talked about some of them, but one area we kind of haven't touched on, which I'm quite excited about, is sponsorship. So Maggie mentioned that Tyrrell's have obviously ended their 3-year deal with the Premier 15, which is not ideal, right? And you could say, what a terrible time to go to market. But actually, I think it's the opposite. I think it's a brilliant time for women's sports to be going to the market, because very often it's cheaper. You get more engagement from the players because, we're not so bound up in women's rugby around, the traditional models of sponsorship. So, Keith, I know you've been involved in that side of rugby before, and I was the head of comms at WASP for years, where, I was quite surprised at the way the sponsorship model worked. It was very sort of, give us the money, we'll put you on our shirt and on the screen at the match, and off you go, and here's a box. And I think that's changed in sport, but women's sport, where the players are working and doing other things, we've just got this great product. And what I worry is that the unions aren't very good at selling it, and let's see where we get to. But certainly, there's a huge opportunity coming in the next year to get that investment that we haven't seen yet into the women's game, because the pace of change is massive.
And I think the fear at the present moment in time, and I do agree, I think it's a cracking market opportunity now for companies to sponsor at a much lower level to rugby, to get their foot in the door, to then try and build something. Because if you can build something over a long period of time, that's pretty amazing. But it's whether the funding will be there for women's rugby in general. That's the big fear, I think, post-COVID, as to what are the ones that are going to be knocked over to try and secure rugby for a future.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're an NGB, like Wendy talked about cuts, I mean, yes, there are cuts coming to governing bodies for sure. There are lots of redundancies on the way. We're heading into a deep recession in most of the countries that the game's played in. So what I hope for, I mean, I would love to see ring fencing. I feel like it's not going to happen. I feel like most sports will say, we will not disproportionately cut our women's spend, and that is probably the best we can hope for. And I suppose there has to be some understanding when it comes to that. But yeah, I mean, the thing that is good is that there's pressure on NGBs now to actually protect their women's spend and to grow the women's game. That pressure didn't really exist a few years ago. The kind of the momentum that we've talked about throughout this conversation, that hasn't gone away just because COVID happened. I mean, people remember how they feel when, I'm obviously speaking from an England perspective, but when they watched the Lionesses, I think 11 million people watched that match last year when they played the semi-final in France. That created something that hasn't gone away. So there is good pressure on the unions now not to be seen to be cutting, women's programs and women's spend. So let's hope that does, that stays, and that we keep the pressure on through, having conversations like this.
The IRFU have their Women in Action plan, and they sent us on the numbers, and they're almost at 2,000 adult players with an aim of getting towards 5,000, and that's up, I think, 50% year on year at this stage. So they're certainly making signs of progress. I'm wondering, from that sponsorship point of view, Ali, and you're looking from another side, as to whether we have capitalised on success previously. And I know there's always a danger of reading into just the elite team's result, but you look at that successful Grand Slam side, and there were so many inspirational figures there who are still around, and the likes of Fiona Coughlin and Jenny Murphy and Niamh Briggs, who were very recognisable figures. And all right, results on the pitch haven't been able to continue. But looking from afar, do you think Irish rugby has capitalised on the success of that generation and of that team?
No, I don't think they have. And there are lots of factors here. That team was... there was a core to that team who had been together for years and years and years, and a lot of that started to dissipate. Players started to retire, have children, etc. So there were mitigating factors there. But the decline in the kind of women's program between 2014 and 17 was shocking, actually, despite the fact that people were really interested in it. And you can't stand still. You have to move forward. When there is momentum, you have to start capitalizing that. And sometimes that means investment. Sometimes that means really smart strategy, willingness to engage, etc. And I do think some of those things were missing, actually. But I think generally in the women's game, it hasn't been brilliant at selling the women's game and at really kind of building the momentum behind it. That is true, but there are some things you can say have gone really well. So I went to the England-Wales game at the Stoop, and I live 2 minutes from the Stoop, so walked down there with my 3-year-old. There were 10,000 people there who had paid to go to the match, and that is a huge moment for the women's game, because the tickets tended to be free for these things. I mean, in New Zealand, I think this is true, actually. I'm not just saying things that aren't true. I'm pretty sure this is accurate. No one has ever paid to go and watch the Black Ferns. They either have free tickets on the back of double headers, or the tickets are given away. So they've got a really interesting marketing challenge generally ahead of the World Cup next year. But paid for, I'm going to part with my cash to go and watch this. That's been really significant moment in the women's game this year that people kind of glossed over. So yes, it's true, Ireland and other countries have not been very good at telling the story of the women's game and selling it to either sponsors or the public. But despite that, the game seems to be growing anyway. So sort of you take with one and you give away with the other.
Another important aspect there, you mentioned some of the players that have now, retired, I suppose, from Irish level, is keeping them in the game, because I feel like they are the face of the game and they're the faces that are known, and we've used, those players and brought them through the coaching structures. So they're now coaching within the province. Hopefully they'll go on to be national coaches, but they're still the faces that are known, in the media and do a lot of the reporting. So for our young girls who are now being coached by the Niamh Briggs, the Feehays, the Marie Kellys, the Laura Guests, those players that have played representative rugby, is very important for visibility, as we've mentioned earlier, but also showing them that there's a pathway beyond rugby, that if they do decide that they don't want to continue playing into the adult game, that there are other avenues that they can stay involved in the game and give purpose to it.
Yeah, and I probably get in trouble for saying this now, but I just don't think the RFU has been very good until recently at pushing the women's game in the direction it should have been pushed in. There's still very much a be grateful that we're including you. Now that is changing for sure, but there's still a hangover and legacy of that. And 2,000 adult players is great, but the numbers are pretty small, and the club game is still quite small despite all the great work that's been doing. I mean, if I were the RFU, I would be begging people like Lynn Cantwell to come and work for me, because we have some really smart, clever women who understand structures around women's sport, what motivates women to play, who understand rugby and who want to be involved and aren't. So there's progress being made there, but there's still a lot to do.
Yeah.
Ali, is there a position for the Irish government in this? Is there an urge to try and drive increased participation among young girls into playing sport? Is that essential for this as well?
I mean, I guess Sport Ireland are the body through which that is done in Ireland, and I although they're the counterpart organisation to the one I work for, I don't know, all of the things they're doing. I mean, I know Lynn, for example, is the chair of the women's committee as part of Sport Ireland, so they are doing that. So I guess that's where the government come in, but we just have to keep pressure on. We have to keep saying it's not, if you're an NGB, you represent absolutely everyone, and it doesn't, it's not just about the gate receipts that the men bring in. Your role is to grow every single aspect of the sport.
It's interesting you mentioned Fiona Hayes there, who often works with us on Off the Ball and would cover as many men's matches, if not more, than she would women's games, and is a brilliant analyst and well-researched and very thoughtful and knows the game inside out. I'm just wondering, Maggie, from your point of view, when I talk about being a voice in the room, that you don't just want to be a voice, I guess, for the women's game either. While you have a huge interest and a passion and you want to elevate it, that we need to get to a level as well that you're just another voice, that actually you can add to the overall grand plan of an RFU or an IRFU, that we get voices in the room that are just part of the furniture.
Definitely. It's one of my biggest things whilst being on the council. I don't just want to talk about women, rugby issues or BAME issues. I do want to be part of the fabric and talk about the men's game, challenges they're having at the moment with salary caps as well. So it's an overall discussion, and I think it's important that when we are in the room that we are trying to contribute to everything, not just the particular areas that we are going in for. At the same time, I still need to bang those drums, because if I don't bang them, no one else is going to. So it's a bit of both really, but we do need to make sure that we're looking at the whole game. Like, I want to represent the whole game, not just particular areas.
All right. I think we've got through a lot. There's obviously a lot more we could get through as well. Just to wrap up, if we're back in 12 months' time, 5 years' time, for you, Maggie, what's success? Where do you want the women's game to be? Have you markers that you can judge it by?
I guess in 12 months' time, hopefully it will be in a Rugby World Cup in New Zealand. So I guess for me, what would be a mark of success is first seeing the Women's World Cup getting good sponsorship, but also good viewing figures. That would be huge for me. And the visibility of the game really being put out there. What would also be success for me would be seeing in lots of those councils and boards across many different governing bodies that there's more women and greater diversity. I think that would be also a big step forward. And then I'm probably going to go down the point that Ali mentioned around sponsorship. I want to see sponsors really starting to back some of those women's leagues, really putting their name to women's sport. I think that would be really big for our game and would really help grow it.
Wendy?
I suppose I would echo a lot of the opinions of Maggie. In 12 months' time, we would love to see more representation, as I mentioned previously. I'd like to see more competitive rugby, at a national level, and that we're competing with the other countries in relation to, Six Nations. If we are lucky enough that we would be able to go ahead with the full Six Nations and have a competitive inter-pro series. I suppose for me, because I'm working at a provincial level, the growth of the game is hugely important to me, and that we have the correct structures in place at club level so that they're sustainable clubs, so that they can keep going into the future, and that it's not just a group of girls training in a corner of a pitch, that they're fully integrated and they're representative at minis, youth, 14s, 16s, 18s, and go on to produce like an adult team. And hopefully from that they'll have representation at a Munster and Irish level, and that would be success for us, within the province.
Ali, have you a list of 100 here as well?
Well, no, they've taken all the good ones there. I think just to be different, I'll say that I'd really like to see the momentum from next year. So next year's a huge year for the women's game, the Olympics and the World Cup within basically 3 months of each other. Women's sevens at the last Olympics was really a quite significant moment. So I think building on that, getting as many brands, sponsors, commercial investors interested in the game as possible, actually using that 3-month window as a springboard for greater things. And I'd also say, given I write about the sport, much better media kind of representation of the women's game, much better understanding, more coverage, etc. So that Scrum Queens wouldn't need to exist anymore, because I only set it up because nobody else was bloody writing about it. And now, sorry to use that word, but now, it still has a need. It's getting there, but I'd be very happy to turn it off, and hopefully we'll, in 5 years' time, I won't need to be doing it anymore.
All right, great stuff. Keith, have you any thoughts to sum up?
No, girls, thanks a million for coming on. It's very thought-provoking, and it's interesting because you always take a perception from your own self and you don't take it from somebody else. So we don't want this to be a one-time only offer. We want to get you on more often and get your voice heard more often. So thanks a million for coming on.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Been brilliant. Maggie Alphonsie, Ali Donnelly, Wendy Keenan, thanks a lot for joining us in State of the Union.
OTB's State of the Union with Keith Wood.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.